Well, welcome back to EWTN's live coverage of Pope Francis in Canada on EWTN, Global Catholic Network. My name is Kevin Dunn, and we are coming to you from our nation's capital, Parliament Hill in Ottawa. That's what you see behind us. Yesterday, we took you to Edmonton for Holy Mass, and then followed the Holy Father on his pilgrimage to Lac St. Anne, Alberta. There he gave a challenge to all of us. He said, when looking at the Indigenous peoples and thinking of their history and the pain they endured, what do I do for Indigenous peoples, he asked. Do I merely listen with curiosity, horrified at what happened in the past, or do I do something concrete for them? Do I pray? Do I meet, read, support them, and let myself be touched by their stories? He went on to say, sometimes a good way to help others is not immediately to give them what they ask for, but to accompany them, inviting them to love and to give of themselves. I suppose that's good for everyone we come in contact with. Earlier today, the Holy Father departed Edmonton for Quebec City, where events will be held today and tomorrow. During this broadcast, he will visit with state officials to give a public address at the Citadel de Quebec at the Plains of Abraham. Now, these times are subject to change, but we're looking at about 10 minutes' time for a welcome ceremony at the Citadel. Visit with the Governor General. At about 5:20 p.m. Eastern, a visit with the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. For 5:45, meeting with civil authorities, representatives of Indigenous peoples, and members of the Diplomatic Corps. And then we'll see at the end of the broadcast the Holy Father in his Pope Mobile, if all goes well, traveling through the crowds and waving as he loves to do. Always a smile on dear Pope Francis' face, and we pray for him today. We're delayed in this broadcast a little bit, and we appreciate you hanging in there. Apparently, it wasn't the Pope's plane that was late. It was a secondary plane with some dignitaries, and so Father D'Souza will explain a little bit about that, because he's used to plane delays and things like that. Anyway, I would like to welcome back dear Father Raymond D'Souza, and it's great to have you with us. And we have dear Sister Philomena with us from the Queenship of Mary Sisters. Great to have you, especially you today, because Father Raymond's here all week long, and that has been a blessing as well. So welcome back, and welcome to you. So, Father, first of all, what can we expect today? What are we?
What's a bit unusual, Kevin, is that normally in a papal visit, the Pope lands in whatever country he lands in, and then the President or the Prime Minister greets him there. There's the addresses at the airport, and then they go off to whatever the program is. So the Governor General and the Prime Minister were in Edmonton to greet the Holy Father, but it was very brief. There were no talks or speeches or meetings. It was just very, very quick ceremony. Partly that was because to make it easier on the Holy Father with his physical limitations. Partly that was because they didn't want to have the civic government aspects before the Indigenous meeting the following morning. So that's why this was different. So they're having that today. So these are the kinds of things that may have happened usually when the Pope first arrived. And they're doing it in Quebec. We'll talk a little bit more about this site. But the Governor General of Canada, this is her official residence in the summertime at the Citadel in Quebec City, not far from the famous landmark of the Chateau Frontenac Hotel. And so this is actually the residence of the head of state. So it's a good place for it. And they're using it because the Pope's not going to Ottawa, and they're going to do it in Quebec City. So that's why they're here.
The Pope's not going to Ottawa, but we're here in Ottawa.
Yes, and it's a terrible disappointment because I expected to see him. You misled me.
We did invite him.
You invited me to Ottawa to meet the Pope, and the Pope wasn't here. The Pope was in Quebec.
I'm sorry, Father. I let you down again. But you do get to spend some time with Sister Philomena, which is great.
We do, and that's very exciting, because Sister Philomena is from Ottawa. So.
She is, and your order is relatively new. Can you tell us about the Queenship of Mary Sisters?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So our community was founded in 2007. Our mother foundress is originally from Halifax, Nova Scotia, but felt called to establish the community in Ottawa, in the nation's capital. And the charism of our community is to love with the heart of Mary and to promote Our Lady. So we want to serve Christ in the world with the heart of our mother. And our mission is to assist our Blessed Mother in building an army that we believe that she is raising up for the times that we're in, and to assist her in bringing God's children out of the darkness and into the light.
You know, you mentioned the times that we are in. They are strange, but every time I meet with the sisters, every time I see the sisters, you have this glow, this wonderful smile, this wonderful charism. Where does that come from? Where does that come from? And tell us about some of the work, the work that you're doing. I know you're building a new mother house, I understand, but tell us about some of that charism, and then perhaps about where things are at today, practically speaking.
Yeah, so I would say the whole spiritual life, everything comes in our community from the Blessed Sacrament. So every day we spend a couple of hours before the Lord in prayer, and we say that we're contemplatives in action. There was a time we used to say we're semi-contemplative, but then we met a priest who told us to park the semi and just say we're contemplatives in action, that everything comes from our life of prayer. And we pray the rosary and pray every day, consecrating ourselves to Jesus through Mary, renewing that consecration, and we pray to imitate the virtues of Our Lady. And so it is with her heart that we want to then go out into the world. So the first part of our day is really spent in prayer and in contemplative quiet tasks around the convent. And we're in a spirit of silence until noon. And then in the afternoons when we would be more available for apostolic work and ministry outside. So it's a blend of prayer and work from the Benedictine tradition, and we come together as a community various times throughout today to continue to lift up the world in prayer. One of our main apostolates now is prayer, as we're seeing the darkness that is growing in the world, seeing the need to pray for those who do not know the Lord or who are just caught up in the busyness and are not stopping to hear Him.
Right, and there's lots of need for that today. You spoke much about your devotion to our Blessed Mother. We're going to be speaking later about the work that the Queenship of Mary Sisters did, not only during this visit, but prior to this visit, with Our Lady of the Cape and the pilgrim statue pilgrimage from Cap de la Madeleine to Edmonton. You were involved with that tour. Can you just tell us just a little bit about that pilgrimage? I know we'll chat a little bit more about it. We did see the picture, which we'll show later in the broadcast, of Our Lady of the Cape on the altar or the stage yesterday in Edmonton. Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So we've been working with Dennis and Angelina Gerard, who are involved in the Marian devotional movement, and they felt called to bring Our Lady throughout Canada, just as we've been coming out of difficult times with the pandemic and so on, and just feeling this need that Our Lady wanted to come and visit her children. And our community in particular felt called to the eastern branch of the Marian tour. We have a statue of Our Lady that was given to our convent of Our Lady of the Cape that we were going to bring. And what was on our heart particularly was Newfoundland. We felt called to bring Our Lady on Mother's Day to St. John's, Newfoundland, and to Flat Rock to pray for the people there. And everything in the Marian tour was actually based around that. We had to plan everything around being there for Mother's Day. And so we went to all of the provinces in Atlantic Canada in preparation, I think, for what is happening now. Of course, at the time, we didn't know that the Holy Father was coming, but just to see how Our Lady has been working and bringing a lot of healing and opening hearts has been very beautiful.
Beautiful. Well, we'll look forward to chatting with you a little more about Our Lady of the Cape's pilgrimage through Canada. It's not the first time she's been through Canada. We'll wait to hear that story. Father, perhaps you could tell us what we're looking at right now. We see some dignitaries, some of our shepherds from the Church in Canada joining us. Can you give us a little background on what we're looking at?
These are the officials that travel with the Holy Father, some of the entourage, some of the bishops. You see Archbishop Smith there. We saw him in Edmonton, and there'll be other bishops from Quebec who'll be gathering here. It's always a bit comical, I find, on these papal trips, because some of these like the Cardinal Secretary of State always has his own car and driver, but when he's on a papal trip, he's on a bus that goes careening through the city to get there 10 minutes ahead of when the Pope-mobile arrives. So, but they're all there, and they flew on the papal plane, so now they're getting in place. Just to clarify that because Canada is such a big country, to move some of the entourage and the dignitaries and the Indigenous leaders, which are important, from Edmonton to here, there's a second plane for that, and that's what got delayed. So the Pope and his entourage arrived on time, because that plane leaves on time and arrives on time, and they've just been waiting, and now they've arrived here. What our viewers are seeing, if they're not familiar with Canadian ceremonial, they might think we've dropped in at Buckingham Palace, but that's not Buckingham Palace, but they look like the guards there. So this represents something of Canada's British history, and the Governor-General is the representative of the Queen Elizabeth, in Canada. So the head of state of Canada is Queen Elizabeth. So we all think of her as the Queen of the United Kingdom, which she obviously is, but she's also the Queen of Canada. That's one of her titles. She's the Queen of Canada. She doesn't live here, obviously, so she's represented by the Governor-General. And the Governor-General, Mary Simon is her name. This is her summer residence. So this is a bit like the Queen leaves Buckingham Palace in the summer and goes up to Scotland, and so Holyrood House is her summer palace, pardon me. This is the summer residence of the Governor-General. So those are the guards who do the changing of the guard and all of that. And because of the Indigenous nature of this visit, as you can see, they've brought banners here. What you see, the flags there are the flags of the 10 provinces and territories of Canada, well, 13 if you include the territories, and then various Indigenous symbols, which are the most prominent of which is the eagle feather there. So everything's in place, and momentarily the Pope will arrive, I'm sure, and the Governor-General will come out of the residence to greet him. And the Prime Minister will also be there. But in the order of precedence, just like in the United Kingdom, the Queen is the head of state and the Prime Minister is second to her, but head of government. Same thing in Canada, so the lead will be taken by the Governor-General today.
Yesterday we spoke about, the first part not being much of a political visit. Right. And this may be a little bit more, because we do see more greetings with the with political dignitaries. Right. Can you speak to that flow? Why the Holy Father might have chosen to do that?
Well, every papal visit, as we talked about, the Pope travels with different hats, one might say, his zucchetto, his mitre, other things, but he's also the head of state. It's a tiny little state, like Vatican City State, but so he's greeted like that. So everywhere the Pope goes, there's always at least some greeting with heads of government and heads of state. Sometimes that's very awkward if the local head of state or government is somewhat at great odds with the Catholic faith, or is a tyrant, or think of John Paul going back to Poland when he was trying to encourage people to live freely when the regime oppressing them was right there. So there's always that dimension. It's usually not in the centerpiece. It's part of a pilgrimage, but usually not the key part of the pilgrimage, but it's always part. So there's nothing unusual here. The only unusual thing is that it was moved from the beginning of the visit to the midpoint. So now you see Mary Simon. She's the Governor-General. She's there in the red jacket. And to her left would be her husband. I think his name is Whit Fraser, but if I'm incorrect, you can correct me on that. And then to the left, to her right, on the other side of the portico there is the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. And they will wait for the Holy Father's arrival, even though they greeted him on Sunday in Edmonton. And then they were both, if you notice, they were both at the visit to Maskwacis on Monday morning. So this will be their third encounter with him. After that, they will actually now have their private meeting. So the Pope always has 15, 20 minutes with the head of state. And in a country where the head of state and the head of government are different, like Canada, he'll meet with the Governor-General, and then he'll also meet with the Prime Minister. And here you see the motorcade coming through this area. It's called the Citadel. It's basically a downtown park on the cliffs that overlook the St. Lawrence River. And this part of the of downtown Quebec City has been preserved as a park and as a residence. And you can notice that it looks like a kind of place where you might want to have a garrison, fortifications. Well, that's what it was historically, the Citadel, which was a fortification, because right below there is the St. Lawrence River, which was the main strategic, if you want to say, military strategic entranceway to Canada.
It seems, you know, after all I guess it just felt very, very family-like over the past few days, kind of more one-on-one, that kind of, I felt part of the action. You know, you saw smiling faces over the past few days, families coming out. There was a real sense of community, a real sense of solidarity with the Holy Father, as opposed to maybe today where we're going to see a little more official things happening. Your comments on the past few days, it's been quite beautiful to see that warm reception, especially in light of the reason why he's here.
Well, a part of that, Kevin, is that the scale was very small. You know, a papal event that has 10,000 people at it is a small papal event. Even the weekly audience in Rome sometimes has 20,000 people. So these were, by papal standards, very small events. You know, we were talking about the 20 years ago, exactly 20 years ago tomorrow, the 28th of July, was the final Mass of World Youth Day 2002 in Toronto. That was 800,000 people. So that's what we're kind of used to as a papal event. The Holy Father on this entire visit will not even encounter 100,000 people. They were probably 30 or 40 at maximum at the big Mass yesterday. So that's why this visit does have a different feel. You know, this is not John Paul II on the Washington Mall, or you know, at the big, or you know, Benedict XVI on the big Esplanade in Madrid or something like that. So but it's deliberately been designed to be a more intimate papal visit. Most of us don't think of 10,000 people as an intimate gathering, but that's what it's been. And you're correct to point that out. And then, of course, yesterday, for example, at Lac Sainte Anne, there were only a few hundred people, right? So that kind of thing is unusual.
You see that. You don't usually see.
Well, because usually they try and create a environment in which the maximum number of people can attend. So you have a giant field that might accommodate hundreds of thousands. But yesterday, of course, they were in a very limited place. And now you see the Holy Father arrive. This is in his Fiat 500, I was told, by the briefers.
Sister, how do you feel when you see these pictures? And I know you've been tuning in and watching. And how do you feel, you know, when we see our Holy Father here visiting our country? Any personal feelings on it?
I think for me, it's just a sign of hope, and it's just beautiful to think that our Father, like the spiritual head of the Church, has come to this country. I feel very, very grateful just for his presence here, for the addresses he's given, and believe that this is only the beginning, I think, of something beautiful that the Lord wants to do, and that Our Lady is doing with his being here.
Yeah, I think we've all felt that sense of remorse, of shame, at the same time as feeling, you know, happy, if you will, that our Holy Father has come. It's kind of a mixed visit, isn't it? Kind of a mixed feeling visit, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we're kind of at the mid, maybe a little past the midway point, because we're going to be here. We'll be in Quebec tomorrow, and then up to Nunavut on Friday. We see the Holy Father arriving in wheelchair again. What's going to happen now, Father? What do we know?
Well, I'm not 100% sure, because normally there's a band that plays the local national anthem and plays the papal anthem. He's greeting here, of course, the Governor General. So this is the official welcome to Canada, even though he's been here for 2 days. and that is Her Excellency Mary Simon, who's only been Governor General since last year, if I remember correctly, last summer. And then that's her consort, her husband, also welcoming the Holy Father. And then the Prime Minister is being invited to also greet the Holy Father when he comes to that red carpet.
Is that Cardinal Lacroix, their father?
The Cardinal behind, that's the Archbishop of Quebec City, Cardinal Lacroix. And so Archbishop Smith was the host in Edmonton. So usually in a papal visit, the Archbishop of the diocese where the Pope is will accompany him wherever he goes.
His title's primate. What is primate?
A primate, well, Quebec was the first diocese in the country, in Canada, the first diocese in North America by a long shot. And sometimes in certain countries, the first diocese is given the title of primate. It's a ceremonial title, doesn't involve any additional authority. So he's the primate of Canada. Other countries have primates. The United States, Baltimore is the first see, but they do not call the Archbishop of Baltimore a primate. So some countries do, some countries don't. And I think we're now having the anthems there. I'm not sure if we can hear them or not, but. That was the papal anthem, which I must say none of us really know very well. Now we'll have the national anthem, which we recognize. So the anthems now have finished, and the Holy Father and the Governor General we'll move towards where the addresses will be given. Not the formal address the Pope is going to give later. And the Prime Minister will follow. So you see the Prime Minister does actually the second to the Governor General. Actually, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. They're going to go now to the private meetings, which are scheduled to last about 20 minutes with the Governor General. And then while the Holy Father is meeting with the Governor General, the Cardinal Secretary of State, Pietro Parolin, will meet with the Prime Minister. And then they'll switch after 20 minutes. And then after that, the Holy Father will give an address, which will be sort of his formal address to the country, or to the political part of the country. Indigenous leaders will be present for that. And the Governor General will also give an address of welcome. I don't believe the Prime Minister is speaking today, but Kevin, as you know, all of the briefing notes we've received begin with things subject to change. So,
as we like to say in Canada, we're following the puck.
So the okay.
I do it.
Yes, I guess you do. We're following the puck. They're a good hockey reference. And so now they're into the residence. This complex, or this campus of the Citadel, by the way, is open to visitors. I mean, not the Governor General's house, but most of it is open to visitors. And it might be of interest to our viewers to know a little bit about that place. So it's a garrison. Now, you know, it's no longer a sort of this part where troops are stationed. However, there is a very famous regiment whose headquarters are on that, just across the area. They're called the Vandus, the 22nd Regiment. So it's actually a working military place. Most notable on the grounds is a chapel in which is buried Georges Vanier and Pauline Vanier. Georges Vanier was the Governor General of Canada in the 1960s. He was a very devout Catholic. His motto as Governor General was "Your will be done," which is not typical. And they're a very saintly couple. And in fact, Georges Vanier, a war hero, he had his leg in the First World War. He lost his leg. Rose up to become the first French-Canadian Governor General. Very devout Catholic, had his chapel at his official residence where Mass was celebrated every day. Very holy couple, and they're buried there. And about 25 years ago, Maclean's Magazine, one of our national news magazines, selected him as the most outstanding Canadian in history. So it's an important place, and right across the country, including a neighborhood here in Ottawa, there are places named for the Vaniers. Georges Vanier High School, Georges Vanier Parkway, Vanier, all over the place. So they're buried there also at the Citadel. And finally, as a historical matter, during the Second World War, some very important meetings were held exactly right in that spot we're looking at now. FDR, President Roosevelt, met Winston Churchill there. Mackenzie King was the host of the meeting. But so a very important set of meetings about the strategy for the Second World War was held right here. And outside the Citadel complex, not far if you're walking in there, there's a beautiful statue of FDR and Churchill, you know, in meetings. So a lot of history in this place.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for that, Father. Well, while we're waiting, while the Holy Father meets with these dignitaries, as Father so eloquently has explained, perhaps we have a chance to chat a little bit more with dear Sister Philomena about your work with the Queenship of Mary Sisters, and appropriate to this visit, your work with the tour of Our Lady of the Cape, the statue that traveled from Cap de la Madeleine throughout many dioceses, ending up in Edmonton. So why don't you shed a little bit of light on that for us? That's quite the tour, if you will, and your involvement.
Absolutely. So what the purpose really of the tour was just the sense that Our Lady wanted to come and visit her children, that a mother wanted to come, and we just wanted to make her available to as many people and as many dioceses as possible. And as we were traveling, some of the things that we found were very important to note was to share a bit of the story of Our Lady of the Cape, because many people are not aware that she is the Queen of Canada, that we actually have kind of our own equivalency of Guadalupe or Lourdes right here in Canada, that she's been recognized as such for Canada. And we would also, as well, we would have roses blessed as something that's been passed on as a tradition from the shrine, a way of Our Lady granting favors to her people. And we would also promote the confraternity of the Holy Rosary, and to share with people the significance of being united as a spiritual family and coming back to the devotion of the Rosary, which I think is one of the special messages of Our Lady.
Father, while we continue our conversation, I'm going to ask you to jump in and tell us what we're watching.
So usually when there's the meeting of a head of government, or in this case head of state, with the Pope, they sit down at the beginning, they exchange some pleasantries of no great controversy, one hopes, to allow for the photograph. So there'll be pictures taken there. And then behind, I imagine those chairs behind are for translators. I think the Pope is reasonably confident in listening to French or English. This Governor General does not speak French. It was a bit of a controversy when she was appointed. But she is bilingual, maybe even trilingual, because she's Inuit and Holy Father in that language. However, there'd be need for a translator for sure. So that's the translator in the background, and that is probably the sign that the the cameras have been thrown out of the room, because we immediately went to the floor. When they switch to the Prime Minister, we'll get some preliminary photos again, and now they'll talk for 20 minutes or so. And that conversation, by the way, we only get a very anodyne paragraph saying, the general topics they discussed, but it is observed as a confidential forum where they can speak frankly. So,
but I imagine as Canada's first Indigenous Governor General, and the reason why the Holy Father's coming, they're going to have much to talk about.
Well, one of the most interesting things about Mary Simon in the context of what we've been talking about this week is she's been a long-standing Inuit leader, so she's known for many, many years, very respected. When the residential schools settlement, which is a complicated affair but was concluded back in 2006, part of what the Catholic religious orders and dioceses that had been involved in that agreed to do was a fundraising campaign. This has been a long-standing bone of contention because they were trying to raise $25 million. They didn't get anywhere near that. They're going to try and do it again. But at the time when they set it up, who was the chairman? The chairman of the commission to raise the money was Phil Fontaine, the former chief of the Assembly of First Nations. But on the board of that was Mary Simon, who's now the Governor General of the country. So she's been involved in this for a long time. She was cooperating precisely in these Catholic efforts at reconciliation. So she will not only have her personal history and the background of her people as an Inuit leader, but also she's been involved very practically in these matters, and that might be what they're going to talk about, but we don't know.
For sure. Well, sister, we'll move back over to the Queenship of Mary and Our Lady of the Cape. Many of our viewers yesterday may have seen a picture, may have seen Our Lady of the Cape, the statue on the altar, on the stage at Commonwealth Stadium in Edmonton. It was, for me, I was involved as a filmmaker. I was involved in directing and producing a film on Our Lady of the Cape. So I spent a lot of time watching, looking at that image of Our Lady of the Cape, and to see her on our stage as Canada's Queen, as the Queen of Canada, spiritually speaking, our dear mother, that must have felt good for you, having traveled all over with the pilgrim statue.
Absolutely, it was surreal to see her, and for me there was just a special significance in seeing her on the stage. The crown that she is wearing actually was donated by our community for this event, and that particular crown was the one that crowned Our Lady as we were going all through the Marian Tour in the Atlantic Canada. And I know that the heart as well contains a small piece of the miraculous statue that it's in the shrine at Our Lady of the Cape in Quebec. So there's just a lot of spiritual significance to all of that, and it was just a real blessing to see her up there.
That's beautiful. The statue you saw yesterday was discovered at a reserve in Alberta and was restored by Brother Frank Sharma for the event yesterday. So big thank you for that, because taking care of these statues, and there are a few pilgrim statues, replicas, if you will, of the original miraculous statue at Cap de la Madeleine that have been traveling. And I know Dennis Gerard and Angelina, they are most proud of the one from the 1947 Congress, this pilgrim statue, which we'll maybe talk about a little bit later. So the tour of the statue, different places, went around Canada. Can you share with us? You said there's an eastern and different kinds of legs of the tour?
Yes, absolutely. We had the eastern branch of the tour, the central branch, and the western branch. So Dennis and Angelina were most particularly involved in the central part of the tour that began in Windsor and made its way back to Ottawa. And our community went from, we started in New Brunswick, went to Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, PEI, back to New Brunswick on our way back to Ottawa. And I think we had about 9 different locations, whereas the western branch of the tour, I think there was just a lot of different people that were involved in that, which was beautiful. Our Lady just kept being passed from hand to hand to hand. Many people wanted her to come and visit them. And
can you share maybe one story about, somebody that was very touched by Our Lady's presence? Well, at least the statue, and of course Our Lady spiritually. Yes.
For sure, there is a story that really stays with me. When we were in Marystown,
where's that?
Named for Our Lady. This would be in Newfoundland.
Okay.
When we were in Marystown, there was a man that we encountered there who was actually supposed to be on his way to physio. He had had some sort of an accident with his arm and was not able to move his arm above his shoulder. And as he was on his way to physio, he just felt this strong prompting that he was meant to turn in to the church that was there in Marystown, where we happened to be with Our Lady, and we were distributing the blessed roses, we were telling the story of Our Lady, and so on. So when it came time for the distribution of the blessing of the roses, he came up and received his blessed rose, went back to his seat. After the ceremony was over, he really felt that he had been healed, and he went and raised his arm, and sure enough, it went over his shoulder. So just seeing stories like that of actual physical, tangible healings happening is a way of Our Lady wanting to show that she really is with her people and wants to be a motherly presence in their lives. It's beautiful.
And people were able to, especially people who couldn't make it to Edmonton or were interested in this pilgrimage, could come to their diocese and make a petition. And can you explain how the petitions? I think we have a picture of the petitions, the many petitions that were that accompanied Our Lady of the Cape to Edmonton.
Absolutely. So each place that we would go, we would invite people to just write down some intentions that Our Lady would be collecting all of these prayers as she was making her way to the Holy Father. So I think it signifies just a sense of unity, a spiritual unity throughout the country, as people are knowing that we are being drawn together in prayer and that Our Lady is covering everyone with her mantle.
Isn't that beautiful? Beautiful. Well, and I think a call to all of our viewers out there, especially as the Holy Father visits this country of Canada, to pray a prayer to Our Lady of the Cape. So who is Our Lady of the Cape is probably a good question to go to. Who is she? And maybe you could tell us a little bit about the history of Our Lady of the Cape.
For sure. So the story of Our Lady of the Cape begins in Quebec. There was a little church there. There was a priest by the name of Father Paul Vachon who was assigned to this parish. And when he was there was a real spiritual renewal that happened, and many were coming out. But when he passed away, it was almost like the faith died with him, to the point where there was a petition to extinguish the sanctuary light in the church that signifies the presence of the Blessed Sacrament, because there were not a lot of people that were coming to pray. And the church remained in this state of kind of spiritual disarray for many years. There was a priest that was assigned there by the name of Father Luc Desilets, who came and was really Desilets,
Okay.
who was wanting to see a renewal happening in this parish, and he would be preaching Sunday after Sunday with very little result. It seemed that the people's hearts were just not open, and he was beginning to feel discouraged. He went into the church one day to pray, and as he came into the church, he noticed that there was a pig chewing on a rosary, and he grabbed the rosary from the pig, said, the people have let down the rosary and now the swine are taking it up. But for him, rather than it being cause for discouragement, it was rather an incentive for him to begin promoting the message of Our Lady. And he made a vow that day that if Our Lady was to assist him in bringing about renewal in the parish, that he was going to renew the confraternity of the Rosary. That had been started by Father Paul Vachon, where he had instituted the confraternity of the Rosary there, but he wanted to see this renewal. And sure enough, as he began to promote the confraternity of the Rosary and to talk about Our Lady, people began to come, and they began to see just a lot of spiritual favors being given by Our Lady, to the point where Father wanted to make this a special place for her to be honored. And I believe was it June 22nd?
That's correct.
There was a very special event that happened there when they had first put the statue of Our Lady in the center of the sanctuary. She had been off to the side. They put her in the center. Later that day, they had a man come who was crippled, who wanted to come and pray before Our Lady, and they received a special favor there. Actually, to back up a little bit, there was a very important event that happened right before all of this, just a few months before the story of the ice bridge. That's one of the main events of the story of Our Lady of the Cape. There had been so many people that had been coming to the shrine that they wanted to build a bigger church to Our Lady. And the stones that were to build this church were across the river, and they were wanting the river to freeze over so they could actually go bring the stones over and come back across. But unfortunately that year it was just such a mild winter that they were unable to cross as planned.
This is the St. Lawrence River.
This is the St. Lawrence River.
Yeah.
Yes, which is a couple of kilometers long. And so Father Luc asked everyone to start praying the rosary for the ice to freeze over. And the months were passing, January, February, March, and eventually Father said a prayer that by the Feast of St. Joseph would there be just some ice that would form so that they could cross over. And at the Feast of St. Joseph there was a bridge of ice that formed, and they say that it was really a bridge of rosaries that was holding it up, because the people were praying as the men were crossing over, and they were able to bring cartloads of stones over. So just to thank Our Lady, they were able to build this big church. And so
we actually have because of Our Lady of the Cape's presence during this this visit, we felt it appropriate not only to have you on the show, but also to announce that we are going to be featuring this film that I was involved with, which is called Bridge of Roses, the story of Our Lady of the Cape. And EWTN is going to be have a world premiere of this film in October 5th. So as we talk about this story, maybe we can run the trailer, so it'll give people some visual of what we're talking about, because it is such an exciting story, such a Canadian story. It happened an hour away from what we're looking at right now. We're looking at Quebec City. Cap-de-la-Madeleine is about 1 hour away, an hour and a half. And yeah, so let's have a look at the film about Our Lady of the Cape, whom we saw yesterday in Edmonton on the altar, and a little bit about her story and her relevance as Queen of Canada. Let's roll the trailer.
I looked down, and it was as if we were walking on water.
From the shores of the St. Lawrence River comes a story of saints and miracles.
I kept pushing my cane through the snow. I could feel the rushing current of the river.
If you give us a miracle of an ice bridge, we'll keep the small church and devote it to you for it to become a shrine.
It was a miraculous bridge of ice to carry stones across the river for the new church.
Like Guadalupe, Fatima, and Lourdes, Our Lady of the Cape steps into time itself.
Suddenly her face became animated. Her eyes, usually downcast, are open.
To bring back a church that had been abandoned by the people.
He goes into the chapel and he discovers a pig chewing on a rosary.
The rosary falls from men's hands to be picked up by the swine. I fell to my knees in prayer.
Introducing Bridge of Roses, the remarkable story of the beginnings of the faith in North America, its missionaries, miracles, and special relationship with the Mother of God.
Heaven chose this plot of land and made it the center of Marian devotion.
She would be known as Our Lady of the Cape, Queen of the Most Holy Rosary.
It wasn't a bridge of ice holding us up. It was a bridge of rosaries.
This little house of God will be too small to contain the power and the bounty of the sweet Virgin of the Most Holy Rosary.
Wow, that's very impressive.
Well,
I didn't know that story. I visited the shrine. I didn't know the story of the ice bridge.
I'll sell you a DVD after
I'll
the
be
show.
happy to purchase one.
October 5th and October 7th, that story is going to be shown. The film is going to be shown on EWTN. And I didn't know. I feel bad because I've grown up in this country. I did not know Canada had a devotion to Our Lady of the Cape. An hour from this, an hour and a half from this picture that we're looking at.
Title of
Under the title
Queen.
of Our Lady of the
Okay,
Cape,
yeah.
Queen of Canada, Queen of the Most Holy Rosary, and this miraculous story of this bridge of ice that was formed over the St. Lawrence. It made all of the papers in Quebec, Quebec City, at the time, of this miraculous bridge of ice that formed in order to build the church at
But
Cap de la
there
Madeleine.
really are two. There's the faith of the people who prayed for the bridge. But there's the faith of those people who walked across the bridge with those stones, because that's not, if you're looking to your left and right and you see that the water is sort of still water and not ice, that's admirable. That's an act of faith.
Bishop Pierre-Olivier Tremblay, who was the previous rector of the shrine, he said he had people who would email him or call him and say, "My grandfather walked on that bridge." You know, like it was so amazing to see this miracle.
What year was the miracle?
1879.
Okay, all right. Okay, all right.
Yeah, so quite a miraculous. And the bridge, you know, the bridge of ice, you could say, okay, wonderful, how did this happen? They poked the cane and they fortified the ice. It just didn't, it wasn't just, it was there. It was the faith. It was like Peter walking on water. And he crawled out and he crawled out and he made his way
But
across
that's my
the
point,
bridge.
because
Yes.
that didn't end very well. So if you're carrying big rocks along the way, you need faith.
Well, as Peter kept his eye on the Lord and then he dropped his eyes from the Lord and started to sink, these
Well, I
folks
admire those men with
never
the,
stopped looking
with
at
the stones.
our Blessed Mother and kept praying the
God bless
rosary.
them.
Yeah. So, and that was just one of the miracles that happened there.
Kevin, to your point, for viewers who are not familiar with geography in Quebec, a lot of Catholic pilgrims will go to Montreal, which is only 2 hours from here, from Ottawa, to the great shrine of St. Joseph there, associated with St. Andre Bessette. So they visit the oratory in Montreal, and then they might drive towards Quebec City, which is about a 3-hour drive away, and the famous shrine of St. Anne de Beaupré, which the Pope will be at tomorrow. But a lot of people miss that in between is the shrine of Cap de Madeleine. So I hope that your film and Sister's presence here encourages people. They're driving right past it, so I hope that they stop. And it's a beautiful
Definitely.
shrine.
There's a tiny,
Beautiful
there's
shrine.
the original shrine, right, that is still standing, and there's also the big basilica as well, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Tell us about the second miracle that happened there. You were mentioning a man who came in, who had a disability. He couldn't make the big event of the dedication of the shrine, but he came by later in order to ask Our Lady's intercession.
Yes, so he came in just asking to pray before Our Lady, and so Father Luc Desilets, as well as another priest, Father Frederick, who was there offering hospitality to the pilgrims. The two of them were praying before Our Lady with this man, and as they were praying, they noticed that the lady's eyes had opened, and her eyes are actually downcast. The model for Our Lady is modeled after the Immaculate Conception. Her eyes are downcast, but her eyes suddenly opened. It was like her face became the face of a living person. And they noticed that this was going on for about 5 minutes or so, where she was just looking at them with a very motherly expression. And for Father Luc, he would always point back to this as a special moment in his life of just feeling like it was a way of Our Lady affirming all of what he had been doing to promote her, and that she really did see him and the parishioners and was very much with them.
And that statue still exists. They call it the Miraculous Statue in the small shrine at Cap de la Madeleine. When we were filming, we actually had the honor, and it was a little bit scary. We had, in order to film her period, we had to take a crown off of her head, the crown that she was crowned with in 1904, in order to make it look and the oblates who run the shrine allowed us to do this, or at least allowed the people there to do it so that we could film. And so the crowning of Mary that happened in 1904, that happened about 30 years or a little bit of time just after Father Luc had been there. But the significance is that this crowning of Mary, Our Lady of the Cape in 1904, 15,000 people there, came from all over the country. And as you said, Father, nobody was coming. Nobody was coming to this parish. And yet 30 years later, 15,000 people come from all around the country to honor her as Queen of Canada, Our Lady of the Cape. And here you are again on another tour with Our Lady of the Cape. This must make you very, very proud as a community dedicated to our Blessed Mother.
Absolutely, yes. Our particular mandate really is to promote Our Lady. We have a special devotion to Mary as Queen of Heaven and Earth, but here in Canada, to be able to recognize and to promote our Mother and our Queen, who also has the title Queen of the Holy Rosary, as you mentioned, which I think is very significant, has a real spiritual significance as to where she would want us to put our focus back into prayer and to really contemplate the mysteries of Jesus and bring the mysteries of our lives into His. So it's just been beautiful to see this story getting more promoted and known.
Yeah, I had no idea. Actually, we're looking at pictures now, just as we step away from our story of Our Lady of the Cape and get back to business, if you will. What are we looking at here, Father?
So this is on the left is Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Cardinal Secretary of State, and sort of the Vatican Prime Minister, if you want to use our term in Canada, and he's meeting with the Prime Minister, and this meeting includes the various members of the entourage there, so they would have had a private meeting, I presume, and then they bring the other people in for the photographs and so forth, and then they'll do a sort of a switch, and the Governor General will meet with Cardinal Parolin and the Prime Minister. Oh, and there's the Prime Minister has now got up and moved into position here. This is I'm going to say something that I don't know. I can't read the Holy Father's mind, but for many years now, with the Governor General, who's very animated, she's a ceremonial figure. Oftentimes when he meets with heads of government, who are actually the governors, he adopts a very impassive look, which was what he gave us there. So as you can see, there is no smile, but that's his custom when he appears. He's kind of explained it in sort of elliptical ways that he doesn't like people saying, oh, the Pope smiled at me, so he's on my side, in political terms. So that kind of look, which doesn't look his most joyous, I'll confess, is often the one he uses for heads of government. And as you contrast it with the ceremonial visit earlier, where he was very animated and laughing and smiling, I might say, the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, has a very aggressive, I would say, anti-pro-life policy, meaning that not only is his politics pro-choice, but he's taken concrete steps to make it hard for pro-lifers. A couple of years back, there was a summer grant program in the country. He said if you want to apply for it, you have to sign a pro-choice attestation. And at the time, the Cardinal of Toronto, Archbishop of Toronto, Cardinal Collins, wrote a letter, public, open letter, saying that, this is quite outrageous, and by the way, you've also banned pro-life candidates from running for the Liberal Party. And he said, as a kind of rhetorical flourish, by your standards, Pope Francis couldn't be a candidate for the Liberal Party of Canada. So I doubt very much that in Pope Francis's list of things he'd like to do is to be a Liberal Party member of Parliament, but I don't know if he might raise that with the Prime Minister. And probably these points of tension get raised. It's only a 20-minute meeting. And then they'll also talk about points of cooperation.
Well, we spoke about pro-life issues yesterday, and the treatment of the elderly, and the expansion of medical aid in dying, the euphemism we call medical aid in dying, which of course is euthanasia, and how that undermines the dignity of the human person at the other end of life. And for some reason, we have a government that seems to think this is a good thing. And we need to change it. We need to be praying for our leaders. We need to be praying for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau that that dignity of life, the sanctity of life from conception till natural death would indeed come back to our country again. He is, as you said, a pro-abortion Prime Minister, perhaps, the worst in history, if you will. But again, it's people thinking they're doing good. When we go back to Jesus' teaching, we go back to, the Holy Father, Pope Paul's teaching on the dignity of human life. That's where we got to get back to, when we can start believing again that life is sacred from conception till natural death. And I know that's part of your mission too, as well, sister, as a pro-life sisters, if you will. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. Well, I think to be Catholic is to be pro-life, and for our community, it's been very close to our heart since the beginning to witness to the value and the sacredness of human life with the heart of our Mother Mary. And I think what is going on is very much grieving the heart of our Blessed Mother, to see lives being destroyed at the very beginning stages, and also at the very end stages here in Canada. And she would like to, I think, reaffirm the sacredness of life. So for our community, it's been very important to be involved in the March for Life every year. Also, there was a special initiative that happened here in Ottawa about 9 or 10 years ago, where the pro-life doctors gathered for the intention of having a novena of masses said every month, that a pro-life medical center in Ottawa would be established. And these masses were so successful in being able to bring people together that we continued these masses beyond the originally intended 9 months. And they went on until the pandemic hit and the lockdown began a couple of years ago. And the community's role, my community's role, was to be able to just offer hospitality after the masses and create an environment and a space in which fellow pro-life people could gather and have fellowship with each other.
Well, I have the honor of hosting and producing the National March for Life with EWTN every year. And if I may, I know I've seen you there, Father. I know that we've interviewed the sisters many, many times. To put a call out again in these times, next year on May 11th, EWTN will once again broadcast the national, God willing, the National March for Life here in Canada. That's May 11th. Write it on your calendars. Behind us, you will see thousands of people on the grass on the grass here at and marching through the streets of Ottawa, as we've done for 25 years. And this is a time for all of us to let our government leaders know, let the Prime Minister know in a peaceful and prayerful way that life is sacred from conception until natural death. That these laws extending abortion, that are extending life, that are expanding euthanasia, expanding, as we spoke about yesterday, to people with mental illness, to people with disability, that this is not good. We should never be drawing a line in the sand saying some lives are worth living, some lives are not. So mark May 11th on your calendars, and please, bishops, priests, Father, we need you. We thank you. We pray for you. And your presence there is so important. And there you go. There's my pitch for the National March for Life 2023.
Great. But I would say that if I have to offer maybe a bit of a comment, I don't like the emphasis on the bishops and the priests. I appreciate the kind words, but this is not a matter for Catholic bishops or for religious sisters. It's a matter of justice that is for everyone. And you don't have to be Catholic to be pro-life. And while I appreciate that, and they make a big deal out of the priests and sisters at the March for Life, but I actually think it's more important that the ordinary, unremarkable citizens of the country are there. So I understand why you say what you do, because they say it at the March for Life, but I must say I prefer they didn't, actually, because
well, your witness means a lot.
It's not
what I'm saying.
Yes,
your witness means a lot.
But it's not a religious cause. It's a cause of justice for everyone. And in the context of this visit, where we're talking about a religious leader talking about justice for Aboriginal peoples, no one would say, "Oh, that's a Catholic cause," to respect the dignity of Indigenous peoples. We might be motivated by our faith to seek justice and reconciliation, but it's a cause for everyone. And so, just like no one says this week, well, the Pope is, the Pope, when he comes to Canada and talks about Indigenous dignity of Indigenous peoples and cultures, is imposing a Catholic view on everybody else. Well, so too when it comes to euthanasia and other threats to life. That's a matter of justice. It's not a matter of the Catholic view. So I appreciate the kind words, but we need to clarify that, because some people, I think in goodwill, and some maybe with mischief at hand, try and say, well, that's a Catholic thing, and it's not.
No, it's an all of us thing. And certainly the witness of everyone there at the March for Life, not just one day a year, but every day of the year, when we reach out to others, a women in crisis pregnancy center, in crisis pregnancy, an elderly person who may be giving up hope, that might just need that visit. That might.
And that's one of the current controversies, actually, is that the government of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, we had a federal election here last September, and one of the planks was to make life more difficult for crisis pregnancy centers, mainly through funding and tax credits. But we don't need to go into the specifics of Canada's charitable giving laws, but to make it more difficult. So, and that's not really in favor of choice, is it? It's in favor of trying to push the pro-life position to the margins, and that's why I say that the Prime Minister has a pro-choice position on abortion, a pro-abortion rights position, but he also has an anti-pro-life position. He's trying to drive that to the margins, and I don't know if that's being raised inside, but it may be. And the Holy Father has said some very strong things on pro-life issues. It may be that the Prime Minister's heard him on that and prefers to talk about something else. The scene we're looking at here, by the way, is the landmark scene of Quebec City. It's kind of funny that that's actually a hotel, so it's not some historic, I don't know, castle or palace where some French, Dauphin came to live. It's the Chateau Frontenac Hotel, but it's a very grand building and it's very prominent. And because it's near the Citadel there, it forms part of the image of Quebec City, even though it isn't a government building, but it's a public building. So that's what we're looking at.
Yeah, it's a beautiful area if you ever get a chance to visit and to overlook the St. Lawrence. So, I mean, it really is stunning, and it looks like a very beautiful day as well in Quebec City. You're watching EWTN's live coverage of the Holy Father's visit to Canada. Today we are in Quebec City as the Holy Father meets with officials at the Plains of Abraham at the Citadel, and we will hear shortly from the Holy Father, who will give an address, and we're looking forward to that. Sister, maybe while we're in the middle of this visit that our Holy Father is having with the Prime Minister. We could chat a little bit more about Our Lady of the Cape and your involvement in there. This story goes back a long way, but most recently, in 1947, there was a big event in this city, in Ottawa, that celebrated Our Lady of the Cape. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, 1947 marked a special Marian Congress that took place here in Ottawa, so thousands of people were gathering, and Our Lady had been coming all over the country in preparation for this to visit her children, and it culminated with a special conference where Mary was crowned as Queen of Canada, and the country was consecrated again to her. So it's just a very significant, very special, coming on the heels of World War II and seeing the need to come back to our mother, that the people were looking for, I think, a lot of spiritual healing from that. And here we are, in the times that we are in. Holy Father has come to Canada, and now we see Our Lady of the Cape has made her presence known once again to bring that spiritual healing. So it's very beautiful.
Yeah, so that 1947 Congress kind of solidified things. There was a consecration of our country to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. What a beautiful moment it is. A big tour with this statue back then. And here we have that tour happening again at a time when our country really needs Our Lady. So we're so blessed to have you with us today. And I'm sure we're very grateful, I think all of us, that you accompanied this statue for the tour that you did, and as she made her way to Edmonton to kind of reign over, if you will, the event yesterday at the stadium. So thank you for that. Yeah.
That 1947 consecration was around the 30th anniversary of the Fatima apparition. So there was a whole number of things that came together. And for the 150th anniversary of Canada, which was in 2017, the sesquicentennial, the bishops renewed that consecration. So it was part of the 150th anniversary renewal of that consecration. And then, of course, with much less preparation, but with the urgency of the war of Russia against Ukraine, the Holy Father led that consecration earlier this year, and bishops all around the world led that consecration. And because it was done sort of very quickly, remember, it was only, 10 days notice, so most parishes just used whatever statue that they had of Our Lady for that consecration, but many places reused the images, the Queen of Canada prayer cards that had been produced in 2017 for that renewal of the consecration. So it has a history in our country, but also a history that touches the history of Fatima and everything to do with the universal consecration to the Immaculate Heart.
And there's quite a devotion within the Indigenous communities to Our Lady. It's interesting that Our Lady of the Cape, she traveled by plane, by boat, by sled to Indigenous peoples all over Canada in the late 40s and 50s as she made her way to bring the patronage into these communities. So this is not commonly known, but well documented in the annals at Canada's National Marian Shrine. Our Lady of the Cape visited many of these communities, brought peace, brought prayer, brought hope. And so we pray to her today that might take place again at a time when our country really, really needs Our Lady.
If I could ask a practical question. When you're taking the pilgrim statue around, how do you do that? Do you put it in the back seat of the car? Do you make a little shrine back there with little beautiful draperies, or do you wrap it in a towel and put it in your bag? How do you actually move a pilgrim statue around?
Oh, that is a great question. So we actually had a special box that was made for the dimensions of Our Lady. There was some foam inserted so that she could just lay very nicely, and then we had some packing blankets wrapped around her. By the time the tour was over, we had this down to a science. Okay. So this box was extremely heavy with Our Lady inside of it because she's plaster. And so we typically would have a couple of sisters trying to haul it out of the van. She took up half of the space in our 7-seater van, actually, and I'd usually be the one sitting next to her, just guarding Our Lady. So when we'd haul this out of the van, it would usually take a couple of sisters, and if there was men around, we'd always be more than happy to actually give this responsibility over to them. And then the sisters would, one in particular who's quite strong, would just lift Our Lady and then carry her to where we'd want her to be. Because we discovered early on in the tour that it was really not the best idea to have her wheeled down the aisle or lifted from one location to the other. We just wanted her to be very stable.
A lot of things can go wrong if you're
absolutely
moving around. Okay, so you had a special box. You know,
yes.
A few years ago, we had the relic of St. Francis Xavier from Rome that made its way to many sites across the country. And similarly, there was a special, I think the Jesuits in Rome had a special case that it started off in, but you had to build your own. So, okay.
We built our own box, yeah, and we, classic Queenship of Mary, we painted it blue and had our little emblem put on it so that
Okay, the one that's
this
on
is
your
the
habit.
special, yeah, the one that's here on our habit, so we could identify it as Mary's box.
Now, are those, how many stars on that crown? Are those stars on the crown, or is that...
Yes, Father. So, so our logo here, it's M for our Blessed Mother Mary, who always points us to Jesus on the cross. So you'll notice that there's a cross central in the crown, and then there's 12 stars around the crown, which is very symbolic for Revelations 12, where Mary crushes the head of Satan. So that really just describes our whole mission, just in our logo.
Okay, very good.
Another interesting point, St. Catery's mother, Tekakwitha, St. Catherine, was baptized by the Jesuits at Trois-Rivières, which is very close to Our Lady of the Cape. Just reading a few interesting points that I did not know. And that Father Jacques Bouteau, whom you mentioned, he was the founder of Cap de Madeleine. He was astounded to discover that his friend, a First Nations chief, had evangelized his village 100 miles north of the Cape without the aid of a priest. So here we have an Aboriginal leader way back when doing that. These pious people were even praying the rosary for the dead, and we could see Our Lady's presence here in this area, only an hour and a half away from where we are looking right now. And so, yes, so it is good to have you here. It is good to be talking about these wonderful events of Our Lady of the Cape. As the Holy Father meets with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, we are awaiting his exit from the quarters inside so that he can give an address. Our Holy Father will give an address. What can we expect with this address that might be different from what we've heard over the past few days?
Well, this is not, there's Indigenous leaders will be present, and because the purpose of the visit is that encounter, the Holy Father will mention that. He'll also mention some of the themes that he might think are important to raise. Almost certainly he'll have a reference. It's usually not, in these types of addresses, a developed sort of argument. It's usually a reference to pro-life matters, which we discussed. Likely he'll mention Canada's tradition of receiving refugees, which has been very topical in the last few years, not just from Ukraine recently. Immigration is a topic that the Holy Father often mentions. So those will be some of the themes that will be mentioned. One of the things that's always interesting about these addresses is that it won't be a shock to anybody that the Holy Father doesn't sit down and write every single word. If he has people assisting him with this. And so whoever in Rome is charged with writing an address will sometimes try to insert a little local flavor. So, the Pope will arrive in a place like Spain and talk about how, he's always had an interest in bullfighting or something like that, to make it seem up to. It can be quite funny because it's obviously that the Pope has not been thinking about bullfighting or something like that, but they put it in there, and it could be that in fact that the Pope will adopt some of these, if you want to say, typical or even stereotypical Canadian themes to make it to make the address more homespun, and of course in a place like Canada. What's more Canadian than maple syrup? So if you listen carefully, the Holy Father is going to talk about maple syrup,
All right. Well,
which is both endearing and heartwarming and a bit comical.
okay. Well, I've always liked my maple syrup. Yes.
Well, who
How about
doesn't?
you, sister?
As I've come to appreciate it very much. I'm originally from Michigan, but
Oh, my
have
goodness.
since been very much introduced to maple syrup, and it's a staple now for us, especially on Sundays when we break it out for special
Very
occasions.
good. Well,
Yeah.
Canada is the home of authentic maple syrup, no matter what they tell you in Vermont or New York or other such places. No offense to our Vermont and New York viewers, but maple syrup is Canadian. And if you doubt what I'm saying, take it from the Supreme Pontiff, who will be addressing the maple syrup issue in a short while.
Well, maybe you would like to go and have a little sweet or a little maple syrup. We'll take a little break, and we will come back very shortly to hear the Holy Father's address at the Citadel de Quebec in Quebec City. We'll see you shortly.
Life is a battle. You're fighting back hunger from your family, the world's influences from your kids. You're fighting to build a world and a future, not just for yourself or for your children, but for your grandchildren. And most of us don't get to be kings carrying swords into a battlefield as we fight for those we love. We get stuff like this. This is my grandpa's, John Stefanik. He used this as a Slovak immigrant to build the dream that I am currently living today. You see, most of us don't get to build up a world or fight for those we love in a way that's worth writing about in epic stories of great heroes. But here's the thing. Not worth writing about doesn't mean not worth living, or not worth celebrating, or not worth great honor. God spent 90% of his life, 30 of his 33 years on earth, doing unnoticed quiet work, things that didn't make the story of the Bible, because they weren't worth writing about. I think he was trying to tell us something in those missing pages about what makes life worth living. Saint Joseph, guardian of the Redeemer, patron of the universal church, terror of demons, spent his whole life hidden from any worldly honor, and as a poor, hard-working dad. The Bible tells us that he offered 2 turtle doves as his temple offering, which was an accommodation for those who couldn't afford a lamb. No one knew how important and amazing this man was, except Jesus knew. The woman he saw on the pillow next to him every morning knew, and God wanted Joseph to know. Joseph, son of David, is how an angel addressed him in a dream. But Joseph's dad was Jacob, right? No, that title, son of David, was a reminder that Joseph, you descended from King David, and even if the world doesn't see it, you have royal blood coursing through your veins, like your father before you. You are a king, a hidden king. I'm sure he remembered that title many times in the midst of the daily grind and stress of life, washing his 10,000th dish for the Holy Family, putting his shoes on for work for the 1,000th time, doing his millionth load of laundry. And remembering that didn't change the daily grind of life. It changed him. He didn't wonder, is there any point to all this? He did those things with the dignity of a king, because God reminded him of who he was. Listen, God wants to remind you of who you are. The quiet work of the everyday, God sees it. And those titles we tend to overlook, that the world doesn't celebrate, that have nothing to do with fame or money or worldly honors. Titles like mom, friend, brother, son, dad. Those are the greatest honors you could possibly have bestowed on you. God knows that. Do you?
I was approaching the altar one day to receive the life-giving sacrament. Rejoicing in spirit, in the affection of my innermost heart, I said to the Lord, "Thanks be to you, my God, for allowing me to share in your most joyful banquet." Suddenly, my soul was illuminated by a flash of indescribably marvelous light. In it, your face appeared, Jesus, unformed, but forming everything, touching not the eye of the body, but rejoicing in the face of the soul, charmed not by the vividness of its color, but by the radiance of its love. It is you, my God. In this sweetest vision, your eyes, shining like the sun, seemed to be gazing straight into mine. You touched not just my soul, but my heart, my every limb. For I am known completely to you alone. As long as I live, I am your servant. As I approached your adorable face, being so greatly unworthy to touch it, I found the abundant source of all joy. I felt as though an ineffable light from your divine eyes was entering through my eyes, softly penetrating, passing through all my interior being in a way beyond measure. Wonderful, working with marvelous power in every limb. At first, it was as though my bones were being emptied of all the marrow. Then, even the bones with the flesh were dissolved, so that nothing was felt to exist in all my being, save that divine splendor, shining within, with a beauty greater than it is possible to express, filling my soul with joy and incredible calmness.
Who needs religion anymore? Today, for the first time in history, the religious debate has shifted from which God should we worship to why bother worshiping anything? On one hand, you have people who are spiritual but not religious. People who are aware that we probably have a soul and that all this probably came from somewhere, but who don't feel any obligation to act on that probably. For the record, Satan was spiritual but not religious. Spiritual but not religious folks often substitute the universe for God, though they attribute personal characteristics like the ability to know and bless to this universe of theirs. On the other hand, there's a new movement of religious but not spiritual people. They appropriate some of the stuff of religion without God. Harvard recently hired an atheist chaplain. Disturbingly, All the other chaplains at Harvard voted him to be president of the Harvard Chaplains. And he wrote a book called Good Without God. But the question is, are we? Gen Z is the least religious, least believing generation in history. Studies also show they're the most depressed, self-loathing, anxiety-ridden generation on Earth. 2016, the first year Gen Z entered college, is also the first time that over 50% of incoming freshmen self-reported that they felt below average in mental health. While there might be many reasons for that struggle with mental health, including someone's basic biology, when we're talking about over half, something else is going wrong. The stuff of faith unlocks answers to our fundamental questions about meaning, purpose, and what happens when we die. Look, we can tell kids who think there's no answer to those questions, or who think that they're cosmic accidents, to spread positivity. Believe in yourself. You can accomplish anything, until we're blue in the face. But they'll still be left with that gnawing question, why? Why anything? So, who needs religion anymore? Call me old-fashioned, but apparently, everybody does.
Well, hiya, Brett. How you doing?
You really surprised me in class today when you said that one can prove by sheer reason alone that justice or virtue is necessary for human beings. I thought that was just a matter for religious belief.
Good question. See, I wouldn't be surprised, Brett, that you're surprised that we say that you can prove that justice is a virtue just by sheer reason. Because the way you're educated, and you worked in the aircraft industry 10 years after college, that's the standard procedure. Virtue is religious talk, and reason is finances, administration, building something. There's a huge split. And so I could see why you'd be surprised. But it wasn't always that way. The ancient Greeks, for example, used reason to invent science, but they also talked a lot about virtue, justice, by reason. I mean, that was their milieu, their atmosphere. And when Christianity came, the church admired that in the old pagans. And they added faith to it. So you could talk about justice and virtue, not just by faith, but by reason. And so you had this faith and reason dealing with moral questions, not just religion, not just faith. But when the Protestant Reformation came, or revolt, depending how you want to look at it, there was this split. The Protestants thought the Catholic Church was too pagan, and you should rely just on the word of Scripture alone, the word of Christ. So they knocked out philosophy, and because it was pagan, and just went on Scripture. That's why today now, Brett, you're studying for the priesthood. And you not only have to study Scripture, you have to study philosophy. All right? That's in the Catholic seminary. If you were going to be a Protestant minister, you'd be just studying Scripture, and you wouldn't worry about philosophy. So that's why tomorrow, Brett, we're going to be starting out reading The Republic of Plato, a great, great argument. Now, let me give you some of the coming attractions. See, the argument starts this way. Plato has Socrates as the champion for virtue pursued for its own sake. And you have the sophist who's going to pursue virtue or justice as a useful good. All right, so we have the two, the hero and the opponent lined up. Now, this is the way Plato sets them up. The sophist says that virtue or justice is merely a useful good. And the reason it's a useful good is, see, if you're a crook and everybody knows it, your cover's blown. You can't do anything. On the other hand, if you're virtuous, you can't steal and rob whenever you get an opportunity. So the ideal combination is to look at justice or virtue as a useful good. You use it for a cover, and then when you get your chance, you grab at it. Perfect. So the guy's a rogue, all right? And Socrates now is supposed to defend the notion that you shouldn't lie, cheat, and steal from your neighbor. You should love your neighbor and do good, all right? Now let's develop it a little further. If you want to get some idea of a man who pursues justice as a useful good, think of the game Risk. Are you familiar with that game? It's a board game where you have about five people, and everybody has their own armies and tanks, and they each have a continent. And the nature of the game is you make alliances with each other to knock off some other party. All right? Now, who's going to be the winner of the game? Well, he's going to be clever because he has to ally with someone to knock off someone else. But then when the game gets down to 3, he
Well, welcome back to EWTN's live coverage of the Holy Father's visit to Canada. We find ourselves, we're here in the studio in Ottawa, but we're bringing you coverage from Quebec City at the Citadel, where the Holy Father is about to make an address to with civil authorities present and representatives of Indigenous peoples and members of the diplomatic corps. Father Raymond, what can we expect? What are we looking at here?
Well, we're looking at inside the Citadel, which is the residence of the Governor General. It's not used traditionally for this. Most things like this are at Rideau Hall. As you can see, the room looks a little bit crowded. It's not a grand salon like you'd find at Rideau Hall in Ottawa, not far from where we are at the moment. But they're having it here at the Citadel, so they're going to gather. And when there's a formal address or a formal welcome, usually you have some representatives, well, you have the Governor General, the Prime Minister, and some representatives of the diplomatic corps, the ambassadors there. What makes this unusual is that they have a good representation of Indigenous leaders that are also present.
And please note that we have.
And this, what we're watching here at the moment, this is a protocol official of the Governor General, and she's just giving the logistics about the photographs and so forth.
Thank you.
And so the Holy Father will arrive now with the Governor General, Her Excellency Mary Simon, and as we've seen on several occasions, there'll be a welcoming drum and song.
Le Pape François, Leurs Excellences et le Premier Ministre. I invite you to please rise, if you are able, and welcome His Holiness, Pope Francis, Their Excellencies, and the Prime Minister.
So they're entering now into the hall. There you see the Holy Father getting out of his wheelchair and being assisted to take his seat beside the Governor General. And it looks like, compared to yesterday or the day before, he's having a little bit more trouble walking, probably just the strain of all the activity of the last 2 days.
It's been a long trip for the Holy Father.
So when the drumming and the welcoming song are complete, the Governor General will then give the welcoming address.
Thank you, everyone. I'd like to welcome everybody here, the Prime Minister, Pope Francis. stay alive. I welcome you. And I would like to welcome Mary Simone.
Badno, when besiege, and one mamu Kristanano, Tichi was a Vendaya, Tichi we mamu, while we voucher one in Muan, where house came away and music.
I'd just like to ask everybody.
What's happening now is that these indigenous representatives are
Our people.
welcoming in their own languages the Pope, the Governor General, the Prime Minister.
Today I'd like to remember the children that has passed, that did not come home, and I would like to pray for the survivors.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Veuillez vous asseoir.
And now
Please
we'll
be
have the
seated.
formal welcome from the Governor General.
Mary Simon was sworn in on July 26, 2021 as Canada's first Indigenous Governor General. She's the 30th Governor General since Confederation.
So just exactly 1 year ago. Today's the 27th. It was the 26th last year. Okay. And the protocol official seems to be giving a most comprehensive set of
Je vous souhaite la
instructions.
bienvenue à cette cérémonie. On behalf of Their Excellencies, the Right Honourable Barry Simon and Mr. Whit Fraser, I welcome you to this ceremony. Just prior to the beginning of the ceremony, a traditional Inuit lamp known as the kulik was lit to mark this important day. Traditionally, the kulik was lit by Inuit women to bring warmth and light to their home. Today, we are grateful for Olipika Rebecca Vivi from Nunavut, who will tend the kulik throughout the ceremony. Nous allumons le kulik, la lampe traditionnelle inuit, lors d'événements importants.
So we're being told that there's a traditional Inuit lamp called the kulik that's being lit for special occasions, and there's someone who tends to this lamp while it's being while it's lit. There she is. And they had the similar thing when the indigenous delegation went to Rome. It's an Inuit tradition. They also had that lamp present for some of the meetings with the Holy Father in Rome back in late March and April.
On va rester assis. Par contre, je vais vous demander quelque chose de spécial. Vous savez, avec la pandémie qui s'est passée, il y a beaucoup de choses qui ont changé dans nos cérémonies. Et on n'a pas eu le choix de s'adapter. Et j'aimerais ça que quand je vais commencer à allumer la sauge et faire mon lien avec les 4 directions. Et avant, je vais aller porter au pape François un foin d'odeur et une plume de dinde sauvage qui est un animal de survie pour les Wendat sur le territoire. Donc, je vais remettre...
This is another indigenous representative, and what's happening here is the welcoming people to their territory. So we have the Inuit lamp, and at the moment he's explaining what is going to happen here is the various instruments of welcome that they're extending this welcome, indigenous welcome to the Holy Father. The ceremony of welcome, and he's explaining the different elements that I think are going to be burned, and the kind of not smoking, pardon me, the smoky welcome. And now he's giving the words of welcome in his native language.
Wendat Ndi, Wendat Indari. Ça fait pas longtemps que j'ai réappris ma langue. Je ne le sais pas au complet, mais de me présenter, pour moi, c'est beaucoup. Parce que quand que je me présente à ma langue, je parle pas juste à mon nom, mais au nom de toute ma nation complète. Donc, je vais me lever et je vais aller porter... quelque chose en commun. Vous vous promenez avec votre chaîne ambulante et moi je promène avec mon déambulateur.
So he's speaking in French to the Holy Father, and the Holy Father is, I think we might say, gamely trying to follow what's about to happen to him.
Et durant que je vais faire le... Oui, vous pouvez la sortir en même temps que la purification. Et...
Oh, the Holy Father has the traditional either coin or rosary that he's giving back in exchange for a gift. And you can see the Governor General there. She's wearing a translation device because that gentleman was speaking in French, just so she can understand it in English.
Vous savez, avec la pandémie, via les petites vidéos là, qu'on se sert, je m'étais aperçu que même si on n'est pas en présentiel, on peut faire des choses à partir de l'esprit. Et on va ouvrir un cercle ici aujourd'hui à partir de l'esprit. Et à partir de ce cercle,
So he's speaking about the Great Spirit that is being invoked, which sometimes is done in the context of Christian prayer, which we would think of as a reference to the Holy Spirit, which is a kind of a point of contention, a point of concurrence there. And now he's going to burn the traditional sage, or I'm not sure what exactly is in the bowl, but it could be sage, some other herbs, sometimes tobacco, and invoking the gift of the spirit of hope. I think it's fair to say that he's actually delivering a bit of a homily here, which would not have been foreseen in the protocols for the occasion.
What do we say to those that might be watching thinking these are unfamiliar types of things that we're not used to? Should we be concerned about this? Should we be worried? Should we like what do we?
Well, because if you're unfamiliar with it, it might make you a bit nervous the first time. But there are what the Holy Father Pope Francis said the other day is that we take symbols from all cultures and give them a Christological interpretation. So, if, for example, when people pray to the Great Spirit, they may not have the idea of the Trinity that we have, but we can choose to interpret it that way. So, for example, when Pope John Paul came in 1984, he prayed in that way. When he met the indigenous people back in 1984, invoking the Great Spirit. That could be monotheistic God, it could be the idea of the Holy Spirit. Likewise, these particular rituals can be given if you want to say, a Christian interpretation, in the same way that at Lac St. Anne yesterday, the waters, which we don't believe in waters in a kind of a superstitious way, but we certainly believe in the living water, the baptismal water, and so forth, and that's what the Pope Francis said yesterday.
Ça peut servir de bâton de parole en même temps. Mais c'est là que le Créateur a mis la
I've heard it said elements of the truth, but not the fullness of the truth of the Catholic faith. Is that a fair way?
Yes, well, the technical term in theology is semina verbi, the seeds of the word, which is not the word, but the seeds of the word. And so, for example, the Pope talked about how the praying praying to God in the direction of the four winds, four directions could be a cruciform symbol. So, as you can see now, they're having a moment of reflection and prayer as this we might liken that, for example, to bells that we're calling, we would have in our churches calling people to prayer. Although I will confess I'm not completely familiar with the details, but that might be the kind of thing that we're thinking about.
I didn't see this on the program.
Oh, it certainly wasn't. And I think he's now wrapped it up here. There we are. And taking advantage of the moment. And back to the protocol officer with another.
Justin Trudeau a prononcé quelques mots. I now invite the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau to say a few words.
Chers aînés, Raymond, Vivi, dirigeants autochtones, le très Saint-Père, Excellence, Premier ministre Legault, je suis très heureux d'être ici avec vous aujourd'hui et de pouvoir dire quelques mots d'introduction. Je tiens d'abord à remercier les Premières Nations qui ont fréquenté et occupé ce territoire pendant des millénaires pour leur accueil.
For their welcome to the traditional and treaty territory.
As we welcome His Holiness this week, it's important to reflect on the significance of this moment for survivors, for Indigenous peoples, and indeed for all Canadians. Hier, le 26 juillet,
Yesterday, the 26th of July, was the Feast of Saint Anne.
c'est une figure importante.
Saint Anne is an important figure for Catholics.
L'amour maternel.
She represents maternal love.
représente aussi la famille.
And she also represents the family.
C'est nos racines.
The family
C'est
is
ce qui
our
nous aide à
roots.
grandir,
It is what
à
helps us to
découvrir le
grow
monde.
and to discover the
La
world.
famille, c'est la première chose qui a été enlevée aux enfants.
And family is the first thing that was taken away from the children who were sent to
J'ai
residential
visité
schools.
de Kamloops, Cowessess,
When I
et
visited
Williams Lake.
Kamloops,
Quand je parle
Cowessess,
avec
and
les
Williams
survivants
Lake,
et avec les familles,
when I talk with the survivors and with
enfants.
their families,
je pense aussi aux parents.
I think of the children
As a
and I
dad,
think of the parents too.
I can't imagine my kids being taken away. When my kids are crying, I can console them. When they're happy, I can share that feeling of joy with them, of accomplishment. But in residential schools, these children were alone and isolated in their pain and sorrow, far from their families and communities, and even worse, stripped of their language, their culture, their identity. Une solitude profonde, une perte non seulement de
A
famille,
deep loneliness, a loss not only of family and community, but of their language, their culture and their
Depuis
identity.
la publication en 2015 du rapport final de la
Since the
Commission
release
de
of the
vérité
final
et
report
de
of the Truth and
Conciliation,
Reconciliation Commission in
Premières Nations,
2015,
les Inuits et les
First
Métis
Nations,
demandent au
Inuit
pape de
and
présenter
Métis
des
have been
excuses aux
calling on the
survivants,
Pope
à leurs
to
familles
apologize to
et aux
survivors,
communautés.
their families and
Des
communities.
excuses pour le rôle que l'Église catholique
An
promène
apology for the
comme
role that the
institution
Roman Catholic
a
Church
joué
as an
dans les
institution
mauvais traitements
played
sur les plans
in the
spirituel,
spiritual,
culturel,
cultural,
émotionnel,
emotional,
physique et sexuel
physical and
que
sexual
les enfants
abuse
autochtones ont subi dans les pensionnats
that Indigenous
dirigés
children
par
suffered
l'Église.
in the church-run residential schools.
L'événement de cette semaine à Musquatchis
This
n'aurait
week's
pas été
event at
possible sans
Musquatchis
le courage
would not have been possible without the courage and perseverance of the
qui ont
survivors
partagé leurs
who
souvenirs
shared
douloureux
their painful
et
memories
raconté leurs expériences, incluant directement
and who
au
told their
Saint-Père
experiences, including directly to the Holy Father
In our
himself.
previous conversations, from the first time we spoke about this, you always offered your time, genuinely seeking to understand, to do right, and to atone. This week, you recognized the abuses experienced at residential schools that resulted in cultural destruction, loss of life, and ongoing traumas lived by Indigenous peoples in every region of the country. As Your Holiness has said, begging pardon is not the end of the matter. It is a starting point, a first step. On Monday morning, I was sitting with survivors, and I felt their reaction to your apology. Each will take from it what they need, but there's no doubt that you had an enormous impact. Survivors and their descendants need to be at the center of everything we do going forward. In April, Dene National Chief Gerald Antoine was at the Vatican, and he compared the moment to the experience of walking through the snow and seeing fresh moose tracks. It was a feeling of hope. Today, I want to say Let's all continue our work together to keep this hope alive. Quand je suis allé au Vatican il y a 5 ans maintenant,
When I went to the Vatican 5 years ago, I was there to discuss residential schools and reconciliation with His Holiness. And I know that your presence here this week would not have been possible without your personal convictions and your integrity. Thank you for coming with an open heart. We are all aware that the residential school system attempted to assimilate indigenous children. Today, indigenous people continue to fight, to defend and to preserve their culture and languages. The traditional gathering that took place in Masquachis is a very good example of this. Reconciliation is the responsibility of us all. It is our responsibility to see our differences, not as an obstacle, but as an opportunity to learn, to understand each other better, and to take action.
Our Governor General talks often about how reconciliation is not a single act, but a lifetime journey of healing. This journey is different for everyone. I spoke about Saint Anne being a symbol of maternal love and family, but Saint Anne is also a symbol of healing. Tomorrow, Your Holiness will visit Saint Anne de Beaupré. Pilgrims have been traveling there for centuries to pray and to ask Saint Anne to help them heal. So in the spirit of healing, let us never give up. Canadians, institutions, let us continue our work together with Indigenous peoples until we reach a better future for everyone. Merci. Thank you. Gracias. Tiawek.
Prime Minister, with some kind words for the Holy Father and some gracious words of welcome and acknowledgement of what the Pope did on Monday in Masquachis. But the Prime Minister is the Prime Minister of Canada. He had, I counted 5 references to himself at a talk that was, as he said, all about the survivors. And now we hear from the Governor General, Mary Simon.
Bonjour. Hello and good afternoon. Unusakut Kwe. Votre Sainteté, je vous souhaite la bienvenue à la Citadelle. Welcome, Your Holiness, to the Citadel of Quebec. My husband, Whit, and I are honored to welcome you and to be joined by survivors, elders, leaders, knowledge keepers, diplomats, dignitaries, former commissioners of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and all of those watching from coast to coast to coast. I want to thank the First Nations who have occupied this territory for millennia for welcoming me to their traditional and treaty lands. Peu importe de vous nous écoutez présentement.
Regardless of where you are listening from, either here at the Citadel or elsewhere in Canada, you are on Indigenous land. It is important to acknowledge this.
Your Holiness, thank you for making this visit to Canada on what you have called your pilgrimage of penance. We gather at this historic citadel where stories are shared and ideas are exchanged. With this visit, you're signaling to the world that you and the Roman Catholic Church are joining us on our path of reconciliation, healing, hope, and renewal. It began in Masquachis, where we witnessed 2 realities. The first was the hurt and pain of survivors, communities of people who suffered for decades, Indigenous peoples forced to live with policies meant to strip away their cultures, languages, and spiritual beliefs and practices. Survivors who every day carry the trauma of their residential school experience. But these people, these survivors, they defy definition. They are parents who defended their children when no one else would. They are advocates who fought and are still fighting for their languages and cultures so that they can thrive for generations to come. They are artists who are channeling their stories through their music, dance, cultures, and language. They are all proud. They are all strong. Your Holiness, they came to hear what you had to say with hearts and minds open, some willing to forgive, some still living with the hurt, but all willing to listen. Everyone hoping to further their healing journey. Les peuples autochtones ont montré au monde
Indigenous peoples showed the world and continue to show us that despite the challenges they may face, they will face it with dignity and great resolve.
I acknowledge and applaud what has been achieved, what Indigenous communities have achieved with this week's visit. It is Indigenous peoples who worked, waited, and prayed for an apology on Indigenous lands in Canada. They never gave up. We must remember that it is because of their courage and resilience that we are here today. Your Holiness, their efforts make Canada a stronger nation.
They never gave up. And we must remember it is their courage and resilience that made it happen. Their efforts, Your Holiness, make Canada a stronger nation.
It is our collective duty to remember what happened at residential schools, to tell the stories of survivors and of those who never made it home, and to support and care for those who did. Support in terms of mental health resources, helping families discover the true fate of those who never made it home, and care for Indigenous peoples who need the time and space to process what this visit means to them and what the next step should be. As you indicated, Your Holiness, this is an important step towards further dialogue and actions that will lead to real reconciliation. Indeed, we look forward to hearing more of the Church's future actions to continue this essential work. On Monday, you visited the Sacred Heart Church of the First Peoples in Edmonton. There, you said that reconciliation is a grace that must be sought. To that, I would also add that reconciliation is a grace that must be earned through continuous hard work and understanding. That work falls to each and every one of us, our sacred responsibility. Il y a un temps pour toutes choses.
There is a time for everything. We are
In
ready.
Canada, there has been a monumental shift in our thinking. Now is the time in our country's history and consciousness for reconciliation. As we address this issue and the future health and well-being of Indigenous communities, I put my faith in each of us to encourage healing. In Inuktitut, to heal, Mamisarnet. Mamisarnet is a journey, not a destination. It takes time. It begins slowly, softly, and carefully. It follows its own path, carrying us forward, but also in many other directions. en Inuktitut, guérir et Mamisarnek. Mamisarnek est un
The Governor General is now repeating in French what she just said in English.
Il faut du temps. Ça commence lentement, doucement, prudemment. La guérison suit son propre chemin. Nous fait avancer, mais nous mène aussi dans de nombreuses autres directions. Eventually, healing takes us beyond powerlessness or anger or pain. It takes us beyond trauma. It renews our mental, spiritual, and physical health. I've seen this in action. I've seen healing through art, through community, through kindness, through generosity, through the revitalization of language, culture, and identity. Your Holiness, long after you leave Canada, I know you will continue listening and learning not only about the struggles and pains of these communities, but also about the pride they feel to be Indigenous, their resilience, and how they contribute to Canada and the world. Take these stories back with you, share them widely, and continue to find ways to work together to extend a hand to heal our communities. I have great hope in what I have seen so far during this visit. Canada looks forward to working with the Holy See on reconciliation, as well as many other pressing global issues such as promoting peace and education, breaking down barriers, fighting poverty and disease, and rebuilding trust. Thank you for your efforts. And thank you to all Canadians for hearing and responding to the call for reconciliation. Merci à tous les Canadiens d'avoir entendu et répondu à l'appel à la réconciliation. Kanada miulimanik nakokmehunga tusagun nakatsi nalahatatsilu tamanna katipaliagi ahagnibut nunaktuamengo hatigitsu tapitsutigilugu. Your Holiness, I wish you the very best on your journey. May the Creator bless us all. Merci, megwich nakokmeg payanamig.
Conclusion of the Governor General's address there, which he delivered in 3 languages, English, French, which he doesn't speak but is learning, so that's a very
I would now
gracious
invite
act,
His
and
Holiness
her
Pope
native
Francis to share his address.
Inuit language. And regardless of what she said, a very important historical moment that there's an Indigenous woman as Governor General at this occasion. You can't underestimate the importance of that development. And many people would have never thought that was going to be possible. And so, despite the gracious words that she actually said, the very fact that she was saying it was, I think, very moving, and no doubt for the Indigenous leaders in the room.
Señor Primer Ministro, distinguidas autoridades civiles y religiosas,
Distinguished civil and religious authorities,
representantes de los pueblos indígenas,
esteemed representatives of the indigenous peoples,
diplomático, señoras, señores.
honorable members of the diplomatic corps,
Los saludo
ladies and
cordialmente
gentlemen.
y le agradezco a la señora
I cordially greet you, and I thank Her Excellency, the Right Honourable Mary Simon, and His Excellency Justin Trudeau for their kind words. I am happy to be able to address you, who have the responsibility of serving the people of this great country that from sea to sea displays an extraordinary natural heritage. Among its many beauties, I think of the immense and spectacular maple forests that make the Canadian countryside uniquely colourful and variegated. I would like to take as my starting point the symbol par excellence of these lands, the maple leaf, which, starting from the seal of Quebec, rapidly spread to become the emblem that appears on the national flag. That development took place in relatively recent times, but the maple trees preserve the memory of many past generations, going back well before the colonists arrived on Canadian soil. The native peoples extracted maple sap, with which they concocted wholesome and healthy syrups. This makes us think of their industriousness and their constant concern to protect the land and the environment in fidelity to a harmonious vision of creation, as an open book that teaches human beings to love the Creator and to live in symbiosis with other living creatures. We can learn much from this ability to listen attentively to God, to people, and to nature. And we need it especially amid the dizzying and frenzied pace of today's world, marked by a constant rapidification, which makes difficult a truly human, sustainable, and integral development, and ends up creating a society of weariness and disillusionment, which finds it hard to recover the taste for contemplation, authentic relationships, and the mystique of togetherness. How much do we need to listen to and dialogue with one another in order to step back from the prevailing individualism, from hasty judgments, widespread aggressiveness, and the temptation to divide the world into good people and bad people. The large size of the maple leaves, which absorb polluted air and in turn give out oxygen, invite us to marvel at the beauty of creation and to appreciate the wholesome values present in the indigenous cultures. They are an inspiration to us all and can help to heal harmful tendencies to exploitation. Exploiting relationships and basing human activity solely on what proves useful and profitable. These vital teachings, however, were violently opposed in the past. I think above all of the policies of assimilation and enfranchisement, also involving the residential school systems, which harmed many indigenous families by undermining their language, culture, and their view of the world. In that deplorable system promoted by the governmental authorities of the time, which separated so many children from their families, different local Catholic institutions had a part in. For this reason I express my deep shame and sorrow, and together with the bishops of this country, I renew my request for forgiveness for the wrong done by so many Christians to the indigenous peoples. For all of this, I ask for forgiveness. It is tragic when some believers, as happened in that period of history, conform themselves to the conventions of the world rather than to the gospel. The Christian faith has played an essential role in shaping the highest ideals of Canada, characterized by the desire to build a better country for all its people. At the same time, it is necessary, in admitting our faults, to work together to accomplish a goal that I know all of you share, to promote the legitimate rights of the native populations and to favor processes of healing and reconciliation between them and the non-indigenous people of the country. That is reflected in the commitment to respond in a fitting way to the appeals of the Commission for Truth and Reconciliation, as well as in the concern to acknowledge the rights of the native peoples. The Holy See and the local Catholic communities are concretely committed to promoting the indigenous cultures through specific spiritual and appropriate forms of spiritual accompaniment that include attention to their cultural traditions, their customs, their languages and educational processes in the spirit of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It is our desire to renew the relationship between the Church and the Indigenous peoples of Canada, a relationship marked both by a love that has borne outstanding fruit and tragically deep wounds that we are committed to understanding and healing. I am truly grateful to have encountered and listened to various representatives of the indigenous peoples in recent months in Rome, and to be able here in Canada to renew the good relations established there.
Los momentos que vivimos juntos han dejado en mí una huella.
The time we spent together made an impression on me and left a firm desire to respond to the indignation and shame for the sufferings endured by the indigenous peoples, and to move forward on a fraternal and patient journey with all Canadians, in accordance with truth and justice, working for healing and reconciliation, and constantly inspired by hope. That history of suffering and contempt, the fruit of the colonizing mentality, does not heal easily. It should make us realize that colonization has not ended. In many places it has been transformed, disguised and concealed. This is the case with forms of ideological colonization. In the past, the colonialist mentality disregarded the concrete life of people and imposed certain predetermined cultural models. Yet today, too, there are any number of forms of ideological colonization that clash with the reality of life, stifle the natural attachment of peoples to their values, and attempt to uproot their traditions, their history and religious ties. This mentality, presumptuously thinking that the dark pages of history have been left behind, becomes open to the cancel culture that would judge the past purely on the basis of certain contemporary categories. The result is a cultural fashion that levels everything out, makes everything equal, proves intolerant of differences, and concentrates on the present moment, on the needs and rights of individuals, while frequently neglecting their duties with regard to the most weak and vulnerable of our brothers and sisters, the poor, migrants, the elderly, the sick, the unborn. They are the forgotten ones in affluent societies. They are the ones who, amid general indifference, are cast aside like dried leaves to be burnt. Instead, the rich, multicolored foliage of the maple tree reminds us of the importance of the whole, the importance of developing human communities that are not blandly uniform, but truly open and inclusive. And just as every leaf is fundamental for the luxuriant foliage of the branches, so each family, as the essential cell of society, is to be given its due, because the future of humanity passes through the family. The family is the first concrete social reality, yet it is threatened by many factors, like domestic violence, the frenetic pace of labor, an individualistic mindset, cutthroat careerism, unemployment, the loneliness and isolation of young people, the abandonment of the elderly and the ill. The indigenous peoples have much to teach us about care and protection for the family. Among them, from an early age, children learn to recognize right from wrong, to be truthful, to share, to correct mistakes, to begin anew, to comfort one another, and to be reconciled. May the wrongs that were endured by the indigenous peoples serve us as a warning lest concern for the family and its rights be neglected for the sake of greater productivity and individual interests. Let us return to the maple leaf. In wartime, soldiers used those leaves for bandages and for soothing wounds. Today, before the senseless folly of war, we have once again need to heal forms of hostility and extremism, and to cure the wounds of hatred. A witness of tragic acts of violence in the past recently observed that peace has its own secret: never to hate anyone. If we want to live, we must never hate. We have no need to divide the world into friends and enemies, to create distances and once again to arm ourselves to the teeth. An arms race of strategies of deterrence will not bring peace and security. We need to ask ourselves not how to pursue wars, but how to stop them, and to prevent entire peoples from once more being held hostage and in the grip of terrible and protracted Cold Wars. What we need are creative and far-sighted policies, capable of moving beyond the categories of opposition in order to provide answers to global challenges. In fact, the great challenges of our day, like peace, climate change, the effects of the pandemic, and international migration movements, all have one thing in common. They are global. They are global challenges. They regard everyone. And since all of them speak of the need to consider the whole, politics cannot remain imprisoned in partisan interests. We need to be able to look, as the indigenous wisdom tradition teaches, 7 generations ahead, and not to our immediate convenience, to the next elections, or the support of this or that lobby. But we need also to appreciate the yearning of young people for fraternity, justice, and peace. In order to preserve memory and wisdom, we need to listen to the elderly. But in order to press forward towards a future, we also need to embrace the dreams of young people. They deserve a better future than the one we are preparing for them. They deserve to be involved in decisions about the building of the world of today and tomorrow, and particularly about the protection of our common home. In this regard, the values and teachings of the indigenous peoples are precious. Here I would like to express appreciation for the praiseworthy commitment being laid on the local level to protecting the environment. It could even be said that the symbols drawn from nature, such as the fleur de lis in the flag of this province of Quebec, and the maple leaf in that of the country, confirm Canada's ecological vocation.
Cuando la comisión correspondiente evaluó
When the Commission for the Creation of the National Flag set about evaluating the thousands of sketches submitted for that purpose, many of them by ordinary people, it proved surprising that almost all of them contained the image of the maple leaf. The convergence around this shared symbol leads me to bring up an essential word for all Canadians: multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is fundamental for the cohesiveness of a society as diverse as the dappled colors of the foliage of the maple trees. With its multiple points and sides, the maple leaf reminds us of a polyhedron. It tells us that you are people capable of inclusion, such that new arrivals can find a place in that multiform unity and make their own original contribution to it. Multiculturalism is a permanent challenge. It involves accepting and embracing all the different elements present, while at the same time respecting the diverse traditions and cultures, and never thinking that the process is complete. In this regard, I express my appreciation for the generosity shown in accepting many Ukrainian and Afghan migrants. Yet there is also a need to move beyond the rhetoric of fear with regard to immigrants, and to give them, according to the possibilities of the country, the concrete opportunity to become involved responsibly in society. For this to happen, rights and democracy are indispensable. But it is also necessary to confront the individualistic mindset and to remember that life in common is based on presuppositions that the political system cannot produce on its own. Here too, the indigenous culture is of great help in recalling the importance of social values. The Catholic Church also, with its universal dimension, its concern for the most vulnerable, its rightful service to human life at every moment of its existence, from conception to natural death, is happy to offer its specific contribution. In these last few days, I have heard about the many needy persons who come knocking on the doors of parishes. Even in a country as developed and prosperous as Canada, which pays great attention to social assistance, there are many homeless persons who turn to churches and food banks to receive essential help in meeting their needs, which, lest we forget, are not only material. These brothers and sisters of ours spur us to reflect on the urgent need for efforts to remedy the radical injustice that taints our world, in which the abundance of gifts of creation is unequally distributed. It is scandalous that the well-being generated by economic development does not benefit all the sectors of society. And it is indeed sad that precisely among the native peoples we often find many indices of poverty, along with other negative indicators, such as the low percentage of schooling, and less than easy access to owning a home and to healthcare. May the emblem of the maple leaf, which regularly appears on the labels of the country's products, serve as an incentive to everyone to make economic and social decisions that foster participation and care for those in need. It is only by working in common accord, hand in hand, that today's pressing challenges must be faced. I thank you for your hospitality, your attention, and your respect. And with great affection, I assure you that Canada and its people are truly close to my heart.
So the Holy Father has finished his address, which marks the end of the formal part of the program. The protocol officer is back giving the updates there. So quite a comprehensive set of addresses. That was a long address by the Holy Father, and longer than usual than you'd have from the Governor General and the Prime Minister. A few points to note. The Prime Minister made a pointed remark that the apology that was desired was to be on the Catholic Church as an institution. So he doesn't accept the distinction between the Church and the members of the Church, which the Pope makes in his own apology. So that was a bit provocative from the Prime Minister. And the Holy Father returned the provocation in his address, where he very pointedly said that the residential schools was a policy of the governments of the time, and which was neglected both by the Governor General and the Prime Minister in their addresses. They didn't acknowledge that. So there was, despite the graciousness of all the speeches, that point was made. Interestingly also, the Holy Father has made a point here, which he's made in many other contexts, where he said that we're very quick to condemn colonization in the past, and of course that's been a theme that we've heard all this week. And he said there's a new colonization today. It's called ideological colonization, when the cultures of poorer parts of the world are forced to conform to the, say, social liberalism of the richer parts of the world. And that was a very pointed remark because, of course, one of the governments that is very, and the forefront of that is, of course, the government of Canada under Justin Trudeau. He's not the only one, the Biden administration, the European Union, but the Pope made that point very clearly in his remarks.
Yeah, it was certainly evident. There was, as much as there was pleasantry, there was also some pointed remarks which you brought up. It was interesting as we were chatting about pro-life initiatives. That the Holy Father did mention in his speech to the Catholic Church with its universal dimension, its concern for the most vulnerable, rightful service to human life at every moment of its existence, from conception till natural death, is happy to offer its specific contribution. Very good that he pointed that out to our...
well, in fact, the address was built around this somewhat forced image of the maple leaf and the maple syrup and so forth, but in that section he talked about the regard for the weak and the vulnerable, the elderly, the sick, and the unborn, and he said, don't forget them or cast them aside like dry leaves to be burnt. So that's quite a pointed image there that he used in the imagery of the maple leaf.
Yeah, certainly something to take into consideration when he says, they are the forgotten ones in affluent societies. They are one, yes, as you say, who amid general indifference are cast aside like dry leaves. Yeah, very, very, very poignant.
Another point I might make, I thought, he used the example, we talked about the environment and care for the environment. He said that Canada has an ecological vocation, which I'd never heard that phrase before, but there's something to that. I mean, when people think about Canada all over the world, what do they think of? They think of a vast country, natural beauty, Rocky Mountains, Great Lakes, 3 oceans. And in a certain sense, I'd never thought of that before, but it's an interesting thing to think that Canada, as a nation which spans this massive continent, has an ecological vocation, which is we don't just protect the environment because it's a public policy choice, but it's part of the specific, if you want to say, mission of Canada as a country. So that was a phrase I had not heard before, and I think we'll probably hear it again from people who are going to pick up on Pope Francis's speech.
Sister, did you have any thoughts? You were following along quite diligently. Any thoughts on the Holy Father's speech address tonight?
I think for the Holy Father to make mention, as you were referring to with the unborn and the elderly, and just kind of touching on subjects that are really, I think, at the heart of our faith, of this respect for life and seeing people that are created in the image and likeness of God. Also talking about the ability that Canada has with embracing cultures and using the word inclusivity specifically within the context of multiculturalism, and how can we be working towards that. I think he's done an interesting job in just laying out a whole variety of subjects and points, both to give a bit of a challenge and also things to affirm here in the country, and a lot, I think, to ponder and take away.
Yeah, I mean, the poor, the migrants, the elderly, the sick, the unborn. He's here on this pilgrimage of penance. To a people that have been forgotten to a great degree, and him remembering all of the other people in this country who are forgotten. That is our call. That's our call, and I felt that very strongly as I was listening to him. Because he has spoke about reaching out, about getting in the mud, about being that living example of compassion, of walking with the other. Father, he says the fruit of colonizing does not heal easily. This is one step in a process, is it not?
Well, actually, the Governor General mentioned one step in a process. The Prime Minister said one step in a process. The Pope says one step in a process. I'll register a bit of a dissent on that, is that obviously no social reality is complete. You can't just say, okay, we're finished that forever. But the idea that we're always at the beginning is false, because in the 30-some years since this issue came to national attention, a very great deal of progress has been made by Indigenous peoples in the first place, bringing this to light, by the governments that responded, by the various churches, not just the Catholic Church, but the Anglicans, Presbyterians, and others. So no one has ever said that, okay, this is finished. Like, you'd never say, well, the work of justice in Canada is finished, or, the work of freedom in Canada is finished. But the idea was that we're always at the start is not correct. And there was one, I'd say, false note in the Governor General's otherwise gracious speech, where she said that your visit shows that the Roman Catholic Church is joining us on our pilgrimage or on our journey, pardon me, of healing and reconciliation.
Why do you say that?
Well, that's factually false. The Government of Canada was not at the beginning of this particular journey of reconciliation and healing. The Indigenous peoples of the country were, and as we talked yesterday at some length at Lac St. Anne, the first group institutionally to get to join that were the Oblates of Mary Immaculate, who ran the largest number of the residential schools. So one doesn't want to quibble about who did what exactly when, but when it's raised in the way the Governor General did, in a very nice way, she said, "Well, we're happy that you're joining us." Well, we've been in this together for some time, and one might observe that the apology made by the Government of Canada, right here behind us in the House of Commons, was done in 2008 by Stephen Harper. It was not done by the Liberal Party of Canada, which was in power from 1993 up until 2006. They resisted that apology. So that's not Justin Trudeau. He came afterwards. That's not, it was before he was there. So some of the underlying undercurrent there that we saw in both of the civic speeches, that the enlightened Government of Canada was happily welcoming the retrograde Catholic Church into this journey, that implication is false and needs to be pointed out, which the Holy Father did in a gentle but firm way.
So is there a process forward as far as, I know you write about this, you have written about this. I can sense some frustration, obviously, in some of the things that you've heard. Is there a next step, and why is it that there is just this resistance to some of the truths that you're speaking about?
Well, that's a short question with a very long answer. So I'll give you a short answer to a question that has a long answer. But there isn't resistance everywhere. What we saw yesterday, on Monday evening at the Sacred Heart Church of the First Peoples, that's been going on quietly for 30 years. It's a reality. There are many other places in the country where very good relations exist between the Catholic, or the churches in general, but the Catholic Church and Indigenous groups. So we shouldn't confuse at the level of national political figures reticence or conflict or even hostility with the reality on the ground right across the country. Those two things are different. So again, that's why I resist the idea that now we begin anew. In many parts of Canada, for 10, 15, 20 years, there have been enormous steps made forward in reconciliation at the local level, and that should not be forgotten. So there shouldn't be frustrations like, oh, what can we do next? Sometimes people who just come to the story when it makes the headlines think, oh, we're back at this, and nothing has changed since the last time we were back at this, and that's not the case.
Sister, I asked you during the break there, as a, what were you, if you had to come up with one solution, what would it be? And I thought your answer was very poignant, and it got us back to the basics. Can you share what you shared with me?
Yes, my again, short answer, but a lot, I suppose, would be said in that would be prayer. That I think that is one of the messages that Our Lady of the Cape was wanting to bring to us, with the importance again of the Rosary and the confraternity, that prayer ultimately is where we're going to receive both healing and clarity and a way forward, I think. And I know for my community, as we're just watching things unfold, very much that is what we feel called to do, is to just be praying for the world and to continue to offer it to the heart of God. And as people continue, I think, to come back to prayer, I think we will see that there will be a change, all in God's timing.
Yeah. I need your peace. I need a lot more of your peace and a surety and hope. I think we all need
there,
that.
Kevin. Just pray 3 or 4 hours a day before noon.
Well,
you'll have plenty of peace indeed, enough to peace to get you through the rest of the day.
I always say, Dad, what are you doing today? This is my father. He's 89 years old. I said, what are you doing with Mom? He says, ESP. I said, what's that? He says, eat, sleep, and pray. That's all we do, eat, sleep, and pray. And he says it with a smile on his face. So I guess that's very good.
Sister already gave us the program at the beginning of the show. If you don't, the first half of the day to prayer, probably more than the first half, because you sisters get up early, don't you?
Yes, Father. Yes, we do make prayer a priority early in the morning, and then keep coming back to it, because it's so easy for the tank to get low, and so we're always going back to prayer throughout the day, and find that is the only thing that can sustain us.
Well, and I'm sure there are many people who never thought the Holy Father would make his way to Canada, or a Holy Father would make his way to Canada to do what he has done over the past few days, and will continue to do over the next few days as we continue our coverage here on EWTN on the Holy Father's historic visit to Canada. We're just waiting to find out whether the Holy Father is making his way to Pope Mobile. On the agenda was to be some greeting to the people who might have joined. But
well, there's near the Citadel is not a publicly accessible area, and you can go there normally, but you can't gather a large crowd. So there's an open, you might say, meadow today called the Plains of Abraham. Nothing to do with Abraham, the patriarch, who was named after one of the people who gave it to the city, as it were. That's a historic place where in Quebec City today, if they're having a big outdoor concert or some civic fair, they'll have it there in the Plains of Abraham. So people have been invited to gather there. That's where the Pope is going to make a giro, to use the Italian word, a tour. But we're not sure, because as something's subject to change, and we don't have the feed at the moment of whether he's going to do that. The viewers might be interested. That's a very historic place in the history of North America. The Plains of Abraham was where a battle between Britain and France was fought in 1759, known as the Battle of Quebec. And that's when the British defeated the French. So the French were the dominant colonial power in the eastern part of North America. The Spanish were, toward the western part, where, say, today, California. But when the British defeated the French in 1759, what were all French territories, which from Quebec today all the way down to Louisiana, became English territories. And now we can see the overhead shot, and somewhere in there, I presume, is a motorcade, but I don't see it at the moment. But that's the Plains of Abraham.
History lesson.
So what happened after that, which is so important for the church in North America? The British found themselves governing a French Catholic colony. They were outnumbered about 10-1. So the British Crown, George III, our Americans will recognize that name, said, okay, in the Quebec Act, we will allow the French Canadians to have their own religion, to practice their religion. Now we see the motorcade there, to have their civil law, and basically they will not have the restrictions placed on Catholics in the United Kingdom, in Britain. Why is that important? It created religious tolerance for Catholics under the British Crown. And one, I'm sad to say, but awkward bit of American history is when the American revolutionaries said, we object to George III. They had a list of what they called intolerable acts. some of them famous no taxation without representation. But on that list was the Quebec Act, and they said this king is allowing Catholics freedom and trying to give them rights in places like modern-day Ohio, and we don't like that. So there was actually a religious dimension, you know, in the lead up to the American Revolution. All of that's on the Plains of Abraham, that history there. In one sense, it was the conquest of the French, but in the British taking over, they also made room for French religious liberty, namely Catholic religious liberty, in the development of Canada. So what you're looking at there now is the Papal Motorcade is coming out of the Citadel, and Quebec is an old city. A lot of old cities have gates or walls. He's passing through a gate there, and there's some people on the streets there, not a huge number on the streets, but they've been invited to gather in the Plains of Abraham, and that's where the Pope Mobile will be headed now.
You're talking.
And on the Plains of Abraham, people are being invited also, if they want to gather there tomorrow and Friday, they can watch the events on a large screen, because St. Anne de Beaupré, it's about a half hour, a little bit more drive away, and the highway is closed, so you're not going to be able to go there unless you already have a pass for the events tomorrow.
Father, with regards to the length of this visit, this is not your normal kind of come in for a few days and depart. He's here for an entire week.
Yeah, there were under John Paul until the end of his life. He used to do week-long visits. They were quite common. Towards the end, he shortened them. And Benedict, followed by Francis, really have most papal visits now are 3 or 4 days. Some of them are just overnight. The big question for Canada was, would he come to Western Canada 3 days and then go home? And there's always the delicacy in Canada of the French-English. The English church in Canada is stronger, much stronger than the French church in Quebec at the moment, but the French church is more historic. And so not to go to Quebec might have been considered well, it would have been considered, causing some offense. But the country is a massive country, so now you're doing another 4-hour flight across. So hence, instead of a 3-day trip to Western Canada, which was always going to be there, they had another day and a half. And then they said, well, if we're adding things, why don't we add a trip to the far north, which I don't think any world leader's ever been to. Iqaluit. I could, outside of Canada, I don't know. So they've made it really, there are 3 flights on this trip that are the length of if he was flying from, from one European country to the other. So that is a longer trip. The fact that it's a longer trip, though, in order to preserve the Holy Father's strength, there are only 2 events per day. So, it's not that he's doing 7 or 8 events per day like in the early days of papal travel.
Well, after some events where we've had limited people, the Holy Father now has an opportunity to maybe perhaps get a little more invigorated by seeing some fairly large crowds come out to greet him on the streets of Quebec. And hopefully, Father, invigorate some of the faith. We're going through some rough times in Quebec right now, well, across the country, but especially Quebec, which was a very, very Catholic province. And now we don't see the faith.
It was, by sociological measures, the most Catholic place on earth in the 1950s, and it had a really quite remarkable collapse. In the Pope Mobile with the Holy Father there is Cardinal Gérald Cyprien Lacroix, the Archbishop of Quebec. He's been the bishop there since about 2012, if I recall correctly, so about 10 years. In that time, he is, in order to reorganize the diocese with the lack of people going to Mass and the lack of priests to look after them, they went from some 200 parishes, I think, down to about 29 units. They couldn't manage even that, and they're down to about 17 or something. So it's a really, the collapse of the church in Quebec, it's analogous to what we've seen in only a few other places, perhaps in the Netherlands, perhaps in parts of Ireland now. So this is a happy day for a diocese that hasn't had a lot of them, and will likely not have any more of them, which is sad to say. But
Can you speak to the decline of the faith in Quebec and maybe one of the larger reasons why we've seen this? I mean, that's a pretty, I don't think a lot of people realize that really it was the bastion of faith for the world as far as the most Catholic.
Well, it was a very high part. You know, I mean, one of the figures cited is that they had 100,000 religious sisters in Quebec in the 1950s. That's a lot. They don't have that anymore. What happened in Quebec is one of the great historical, cultural, social questions of the time. What happened in Quebec? The story that the dominant elite consensus in Quebec says today is that, well, the church was oppressive, society was priest-ridden, they limited the freedom of the people, and when Quebec finally stood on its own 2 feet, it threw off the English in politics and business and threw off the church in social and cultural matters. The other argument, the counter-argument would be, well, actually, it was the church that preserved the French language, the French culture for centuries when they had no political and little economic power. And what happened, in fact, was Quebec just lost its confidence, lost its faith, and turned against its own heritage, which is manifest in the most dramatic way in that the French-Canadian population of Quebec is not replacing itself in that sense. So the truth is likely between those two. There's some of each. There's no doubt that the church's presence in Quebec was much more far-reaching than in other places. And that happens in history, is when the church has a lot of civic power, there can be rebellion against that. And that's one of the themes we're examining throughout this visit is, where is the gospel? Where is civic power? Where is evangelization? Where is cooperation? Where is co-optation? And that's one of the themes that's behind the situation in Quebec. So,
Sister, any thoughts on evangelization in the 21st century? You do it every day, first of all by prayer, but you're also very active. You're also very active in the community. Can you speak to your charism, your community's charism on evangelization?
Sure. So, as I mentioned earlier with our charism, our approach to evangelization is to do it through Mary. And I think...
And why is Mary a good way to evangelize?
Well, Mary is the one who leads us to Jesus. Amen. She's always led us to Jesus. The way that Jesus came to us was through our mother, and Mary wants to bring us by the hand back into the heart of God. And so this is a mission that we feel very, very blessed to be a part of. I think evangelization is just a key aspect that we're coming into as church. We've been talking about the need for new evangelization for many years, to be engaged in that. And I think just at the heart of that is being able to witness with our lives and also with our actions to the love of God. I had a beautiful experience actually in Quebec City. I went a few months ago and spent time with Francois de Laval, Catherine of St. Augustine, and Marie de l'Incarnation, the 3 spiritual co-founders, and just felt a real sense of the Lord wanting to renew his covenant with Quebec, with the country, and that they want to pass on the torch, that what they have begun spiritually and the foundation that they have laid is something to be carried on. So I hold that in my heart as a special message of hope.
Mary, Mary, Mary at the heart. She brought us to Jesus in the beginning, perhaps, and she will, we know that. She will crush the head of Satan, as it says in Revelation. And Our Lady of the Cape there in Quebec, Our Lady of the Cape in Cap de la Madeleine. Many years after Cartier came, there we are, her presence, her bringing the faith from an empty parish in the middle of nowhere to Canada's National Marian Shrine. Now tomorrow we'll be just a few moments away from Cap de la Madeleine. When you go to Cap de la Madeleine, all the way to the Shrine of Saint Anne de Beaupré, which is about a half-hour drive and that's where we will be tomorrow. Is that not correct, Father?
Quebec City, San Incorporated, about a half-hour drive. Captain My Lands in the opposite direction.
There you go. There you go. I'm getting my...
Well, you put a nice bridge into the river, it gets everybody confused as to which direction you're going. Yes. But tomorrow will be at Saint Anne de Beaupré. The Holy Father now leaving the Plains of Abraham, and he'll go back. I think he's staying in Quebec City at the residence of the Archbishop there. And one of the things we're going to see tomorrow in the evening is the predecessor of that man in the background, Cardinal Lacroix. His predecessor is Archbishop of Quebec, way back when, in the 17th century, Saint Francois de Laval. And he has a very interesting story because his presence in Quebec was a function of the French colonial power. There's no other way to get there in the 17th century. But he established the church there in Quebec, and he was courageous enough to protest against the colonial authorities, the French civil authorities, precisely over the treatment of Indigenous people. So this is a part of our Catholic Indigenous encounter that goes back 200 years before the first residential school was even instituted. So one of the difficulties about viewing everything through the lens of residential schools is not that what we say might be incorrect about them, but it's incomplete in that the relationship is 200 years old before they even started it. You know? The church has been with Indigenous peoples for longer than Canada has been a country. And the residential schools, of course, are, came after Canada became a country. So we're going to see a little bit of that tomorrow in, looking at the relationship beyond residential schools or before residential schools, because it would be an injustice to the both generations of Indigenous Catholics, but also the missionaries who came, to say that nothing that happened in the first 200 years was of value. And we're going to meet the saints that Sister Philomena mentioned, the female foundresses there in Quebec City, but we'll also meet that first bishop, Saint Francois de Laval.
Watching the Holy Father's coverage on EWTN as children, little babies, toddlers are brought out. Some of looks like the Holy Father's one of his favorite things to do: bless and kiss those beautiful, beautiful children, and we admire him for that. We need to revere our beautiful children more and more as society, as a blessing, which they are. Yesterday we celebrated the feast of St. Anne's and Joachim, our grandparents of Jesus. We had Grandparents' Day on Sunday, and here he is with another little one. Just love it, always bringing a smile to the face. Boy, oh boy. Could that be twins, maybe? Isn't that beautiful?
Actually, Kevin.
Oh, okay.
From two obviously different families.
Okay, well, thanks for pointing that out, Father. Thanks. I can always count on you to tell the truth.
It's a Truth and Reconciliation Week,
Okay,
you got to have both options
now you're
there.
getting punchy. Father, tell us about Father Henry Sands, who will be joining
Father Henry
us.
Sands is coming tomorrow. So Father Henry Sands is both Canadian and American, dual citizen. He grew up in Canada, in southwestern Ontario, so down towards the Michigan area, of which Sister Philomena hails from. And he grew up on the Indigenous reservation there. So his background, he's an Indigenous Canadian. He grew up in that area. He knows that land. And he's a Catholic priest. So he's lived what is sometimes overlooked in all of this, which is that Indigenous people who are Catholic. He currently is working in Washington. He works for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. There's an office in that secretariat called the Office of Black and Indian Affairs, and he's the director of that office. So he works on these issues, if you want to say, professionally on behalf of the American bishops.
And he was part of the delegation that went to see the Holy Father.
I believe so. I'm not sure if he was part of the delegation because he was Canadians, but he was accompany. He works on these issues, but he may have been actually part of the delegation formally. But he's, in fact, a few weeks ago when I was speaking to him about our coverage, he was just about to go back to southwestern Ontario for a few days of preaching and so forth, getting ready for the papal visit. So he'll be with us tomorrow and also on Friday as well. So he has a wealth of both experience, expertise, but also, if you want to say, professional engagement at the moment on this. So.
Yeah, beautiful priest, so humble. I had the opportunity to have a phone interview with him a couple of weeks ago, and wow. And then listen to his testimony that he gave at a parish very close to where he grew up. And man, that was just so profound, so beautiful. And hopefully we get a chance to talk about it and maybe throw up the link tomorrow, because it's well worth listening to Father Maurice Henry Sands, who will be joining us, as Father mentioned, for the next couple of days as we continue our coverage here on EWTN. The Holy Father's visit, historic visit to Canada. You're watching the Holy Father through the streets of Quebec City, where he just gave an address at the Citadel, along with Governor General Mary Simon. And man, it's good to see the crowds out. It's wonderful to see the crowds out on the streets of Quebec. Sister, any thoughts?
I think may this just be the beginning of a spiritual awakening in Quebec. I do believe that it is very much still in the heart of Quebecers, not far away, that there is still a remembrance there. And I do hope that this visit is something that just touches their hearts, maybe brings some healing, and that we will begin to see a renewal. That is something that I am praying for, very much so.
Tomorrow, Father, there's a Mass, correct?
Yes, there's two public Mass, or two Masses publicly on this trip. We were at the one in Commonwealth Stadium yesterday in Edmonton. Tomorrow it's at St. Anne de Beaupré. So St. Anne, there are two principal St. Anne shrines with our Queenship of Mary sister here. I'm now putting everything into Our Lady's mantle. So, but two principal St. Anne shrines in the country. Lac St. Anne, which is a small shrine church, but the local area. St. Anne de Beaupré is a big basilica. It's been a pilgrimage place for a long time. Holy Father will say Mass there. It's not the Feast of St. Anne. The Mass will be for reconciliation. It's one of the sets of prayers we can use at the Holy Mass. But it's going to be there in the feast, in the presence of St. Anne. It's not such a big crowd inside, a few thousand, but there'll be about 15,000, I think, outside in the plaza there. And then other people will watch it on the Plains of Abraham. And then he will return to the Cathedral of Quebec for the evening with the Vespers with priests, bishops, seminarians, and so forth, in the presence of the tomb of St. Francois de Val. So that's what will be tomorrow.
And this is prior to his flight to Nunavut, where he will end his trip on Friday before he departs back for Rome. Is he heading back to Rome?
He's going to go straight. Well, this was a logistical challenge because you can't stay overnight in Nunavut in Iqaluit. There's not enough rooms. I mean, it's a very remote area, so you have to get in and out the same day, but it's 3 hours to fly up there. So they decided cleverly that you go up there and then go back to Rome. Because in the Arctic, it's on a globe or a map, it's hard to figure out where things are. Actually, Iqaluit is east of Quebec City, so he's actually already kind of on his way back to Rome, and then he'll fly back overnight. He'll arrive back in Rome on Saturday morning. So.
Well, as we wrap up here in, you're looking at Quebec City, and we wrap up here in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. It's been wonderful to have you with us, Sister Philomena. We pray for you. We bless you. Any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
Well, it's been an honor to be a part of this today. Thank you very much for extending the invitation, and just continue to keep the Pope's visit very much in my heart and prayers.
Please say hello to Mother for us and all of the sisters. You're always so beautiful, so wonderful. Bring a sense of peace to the studio. Father, you'll be back with us tomorrow?
I'll be back tomorrow morning.
Looking forward to it. Well, Holy Mass with Pope Francis at the National Shrine of St. Anne de Beaupré, Quebec tomorrow, and later tomorrow, the Holy Father will lead Vespers with bishops, priests, deacons, consecrated persons, seminarians, and pastoral workers at the Cathedral Basilica of Notre Dame de Quebec in Quebec City. Coverage starts at 5 p.m. So, and that's tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, please do join us for that as well. Please check with EWTN for a complete schedule, which includes your broadcast start times in your particular time zone. As we sign off, we'll be praying that Our Lady of the Cape, whom we spoke so much about today, will be an instrument to help her reclaim her queenship over all the peoples of Canada who are in so much need of her powerful intercession. Our Lady of the Cape, pray for us. Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for tuning in, for watching this coverage of Pope Francis in Canada. You're watching us on EWTN Global Catholic Network. We'll see you tomorrow. My name is Kevin Dunn, and may God bless you.